child of Stalin. Full word. Based on true life accounts. We often see one of two scenarios when it comes to important judicial decisions. Either a person has committed heinous crimes and caused untold sorrow getting clean away with what they have done, or a case, such as Rowan Daniels, convicted of only manslaughter after a vicious attack on his mother's boyfriend with a machete, being sentenced to just 10 years in jail, with the likelihood of being free after just 5 years, or another individual after 20 or more years in jail freed on DNA evidence after having been fitted up by the police in another miscarriage of justice case, such as Derek Bentley, hanged for committing a murder while he was under arrest at the time, and not having pulled the trigger, and having the intelligence of a 10-year-old. These injustices are, contrary to common belief, taking place today at the hands of magistrates and Crown Court judges, and yet no one seems to be held to account for their biased judgments. This publication has been written in an effort to highlight a single example of extreme bias focused upon one individual from his childhood years until his adult life, due to his near unpronounceable name, his social standing, refugee misfit of a father and his schizophrenic mother, thus formulating a cocktail of social dynamics that would be rife for authorities to exploit by way of a harsh judicial bias. This publication attempts to disclose a situation where the judicial system is not the bastion of justice due to its inherent weaknesses, and has backfired upon itself, leaving a record where at least one of its targets has refused to succumb to its hubristic sense of power and uprightness, and has kept a log of the occasions where their misgivings are exposed. The end result is here seen as the following. Imagine for a moment a fair and impartial Supreme Judge with the authority to finally call to account judges within the establishment who have abused their position as the following occurs. A grand chamber stands in solemnity, its atmosphere heavy with anticipation as the ultimate arbiter takes his place within a court to judge the courts. Amidst the hushed murmurs of the assembly, the voice of the Supreme Judge resonates with authority, piercing through the stillness. How long, he begins, his gaze sweeping across the gathered judges, will you persist in defending the unjust, and in showing favoritism to the wicked? His words hang in the air, a stern rebuke directed at those entrusted with the solemn duty of dispensing justice. For too long, they have turned a blind eye to the cries of the oppressed, preferring instead to align themselves with the powerful and corrupt. For a change, defend the weak and the fatherless, he commands, his voice echoing with conviction. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the vulnerable from the clutches of the wicked. It is a clarion call to rightness, a reminder of the obligation borne by those in positions of authority. Yet, despite the gravity of his words, the judges remain unmoved, their hearts hardened by self-interest and complacency. You judges are blind, he declares, his tone laced with sorrow. You stumble in darkness, oblivious to the crumbling foundations of society. He sees through their pretense, their facade of wisdom crumbling under the weight of their ignorance. No longer can they claim ignorance, as their actions have laid bare the truth of their folly. We once called you judges, he laments on behalf of society, his voice tinged with disappointment. But you have proven yourselves no better than the peasants you oppress, destined to fade into obscurity like all who came before you. It is a somber indictment, a reminder of the fleeting nature of power, and the inevitability of its demise. Though they may wield authority for a time, their reign is but a fleeting illusion, destined to crumble beneath the weight of their own injustice. And so, the ultimate judge pronounces his verdict. His words are harbinger of reckoning for those who have forsaken their sacred duty. In the end, they will be judged not by the accolades of men, but by the righteousness of their deeds and the compassion in their hearts. The following is based on true life accounts, and highlights one of the many thousands of cases that do not attract sufficient scrutiny, because there read too many. This will be followed by the final reckoning of the justice system, and then part of a life story of Anthony Yanofsky, who has been subject to the full force of judicial malpractice. The role of legal representation and judicial background in the cases of Defendant A and Defendant B. Introduction: Justice or Judgment. In any society, the judiciary must be both impartial and equitable, administering justice with a commitment to law, rather than bias or personal perspective. Yet in the United Kingdom, a system hailed for its ancient fairness, there is an increasing perception that sentencing outcomes are often determined not only by the facts of a case, but also by the social position of the accused, and the background of the presiding judge. This dissertation explores this unsettling dynamic through the lens of two harrowing cases involving the deaths of newborn infants. While both cases involved shocking circumstances and tragic consequences, the paths to sentencing diverged in stark and troubling ways. This paper argues that disparities in judicial temperament, legal representation, and socio-economic context compound a broader issue of structural unfairness within the British legal system. The British judicial system, equal before the law. The British legal system is built on the foundational principle that all individuals are equal before the law. However, this formal ideal frequently diverges from practice. Structural inequalities embedded in the criminal justice process, ranging from access to competent legal representation to the social conditioning of the judiciary, erode the notion of fairness. Low-income defendants are often reliant on underfunded legal aid services and are more vulnerable to longer sentences and harsher judicial interpretations. Judicial discretion, while essential for flexibility, allows significant latitude in sentencing, which means outcomes can be heavily shaped by a judge's personal and professional background. Case Study I. Defendant A and the Weight of a Seasoned Judge. Defendant A, a woman in her late 20s, gave birth alone, in secret, and subsequently caused the death of the newborn. The child was found wrapped in plastic bags, with evidence indicating survival for several hours and injuries consistent with trauma. The mother collapsed a week or so later, was rushed to hospital, and immediately explained to her father what she had done, and showed concern for whether her baby had been found alive. The sentencing judge, referred to as Judge X, characterized the act as a totally shocking crime, and imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years. Judge X, whose background includes extensive experience in criminal law, approached the case with a strong emphasis on deterrence and retribution. There was limited judicial engagement with the defendant's mental health or the broader psychosocial context surrounding the event. The limits of judicial discretion. Discretion allows judges to weigh context, yet it also introduces subjectivity. While many judges exercise discretion with sensitivity, others are shaped by their legal roots, whether in prosecution, defense, civil law, or academic theory. In Defendant A's case, Judge X's deep ties to traditional criminal adjudication arguably reduced their receptiveness to contextual nuances such as perinatal mental health, trauma, or social isolation. When sentencing latitude is this broad personal experience, an ideology can shift outcomes dramatically. While law aims to impose equality, discretion without checks can create a fractured landscape of justice. Case Study 2. Defendant B and the Empathy of a Judicial Outsider. Defendant B also gave birth in secret and caused the death of her child. She did not come forward and was only arrested 24 years later due to DNA evidence. She claimed that although giving birth at full term, she at 19 years of age had hidden the pregnancy from her husband and discarded the baby boy who had been found with tissue forced down his throat. However, the judicial handling of her case differed significantly. Presided over by Judge Y, a jurist with a professional history focused more on civil and employment law than criminal prosecution, the case took on a different tone. Judge Y did not approach the actions with a prosecutorial instinct. Instead, the ruling reflected an effort to understand the psychological and emotional context of the incident. There was space for mitigation, reflection, and acknowledgement of mental health crises, particularly postpartum trauma. She was sentenced to a suspended sentence for manslaughter which a conviction for murder would not have allowed. She was free to leave the court, where there had been a 24-year investigation without anyone coming forward. She was allowed to plead guilty to manslaughter in contrast to Defendant A who, given the correct advice, could have done the same given the trauma having delivered 8 weeks earlier alone and without support. The significance of judicial background. Judge Y's limited exposure to violent criminal cases paradoxically became an asset. Lacking desensitization from repeated contact with violent offenders, Judge Y applied a broader, more human-centered framework. This raises important questions. Should serious criminal cases only be heard by judges with deep experience in criminal law? Or might diversity in judicial background actually enhance the system's sensitivity to complex human factors? Judge Y's handling of Defendant B's case suggests that a wider range of legal perspectives can lead to more balanced sentencing. When we consider the above, we may be shocked that these cases have not garnered more attention, given that they both involve the ending of lives at their earliest outset. This understandable shock can come from two perspectives. Either feel that the mother who appeared to carry out an abundance of pre-planning and subterfuge in hiding what happened for 24 years should have been dealt with more harshly, receiving some sort of custodial sentence, or that the other, who had little support as a farm worker and gave birth unexpectedly at 32 weeks, should have had her mental state taken into consideration and received less than life with a minimum of 18 years, or even a manslaughter conviction instead of murder. Whatever we feel, the disparity between the two cases is somewhat overwhelming, and we can't help wondering why this is the case in our modern age. It is with the above in mind that we introduce you to The Child of Stalin. The premise is summed up in the following. If there is a tangible record of a vulnerable individual who has been treated with utter bias and endured years of unwarranted mistreatment by the police, magistrates, appeal courts, and even the Attorney General's office, then at least three queries persist. 1. How and why would the judiciary wish to put so much negative effort into the mistreatment of an individual? And 2. Is any individual safe from a miscarriage of justice? 3. How can I protect myself if I am ever asked by the police to assist them with their inquiries, whether I have inadvertently breached some nefarious criminal act of Parliament? So, without this publication suggesting actual legal advice, after you have read Child of Stalin, you may be able to avoid an unnecessarily prosecution that could interfere with your life for over a year, even if the charges are dropped. The following account shows how and why some are handed simply to support the confidence of the judiciary, and why you cannot trust that because you are innocent you are safe. Firstly, we will deal with some background material. The scene is set. The weight of a name coupled with bonds of prejudice. In the small town of Margate, nestled on the south-east coast of England, lived a community that gave the outward appearance of being bound by familiarity and routine. Children appeared to play contentedly in the streets, neighbors exchanged what looked like pleasantries, and life seemed to echo that of a gentle rhythm. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic facade lurked the insidious tendrils of prejudice, waiting to ensnare the unsuspecting. This could be said of many towns and villages of the UK after the enforced influx of foreign settlers after the Second World War. Among the residents of Margate were the Yanovsky family, with a father who, as a recent refugee from Siberia and Russia, selfishly fended only for himself. Pavel Yanovsky, a work-shy gambler with a tendency towards everything dishonest and an inherent violent demeanor, had moved to the town seeking a better life just for himself. His second son, Anthony, a bright-eyed boy with a passion for learning, quickly found himself drawn into the fold of the local schools. However, despite efforts to integrate, the Janovskys found themselves a target of whispered rumors and sideways glances. The mere sound of their surname, Yanovsky, seemed to trigger a cascade of unfounded assumptions and prejudices, along with their appearance of having a very low social standing. It did not help that Mrs. Yanovsky was suffering from schizophrenia, having been selected by Pavel to bear his offspring, simply to secure his position as a permanent resident in the UK. In the minds of the so-called respectable townsfolk of Margate, the name Yanovsky carried with it a heavy burden of history. Memories of Joseph Stalin, the infamous Soviet dictator, cast a long shadow over any individual with a Russian-sounding name. Though Pavel had never set foot in Moscow, with only a faint connection to Stalin, the townspeople couldn't shake the misguided association. One particularly influential figure in perpetuating this prejudice was Mr. Thompson, a staunch conservative with a penchant for conspiracy theories. Convinced of a vast communist infiltration in the heart of the UK, he saw the Janovskys as the embodiment of his worst fears. "It's in their blood," Mr. Thompson would mutter to anyone who would listen, his voice dripping with disdain. "Stalin's spawn lurking among us, waiting to strike." His influential words found fertile ground in the minds of his fellow townspeople, many of whom were all too eager to latch onto any excuse for their own biases. And so, the Janovskys had become unwitting scapegoats for the sins of a bygone era. For young Anthony, the weight of this prejudice bore down heavily upon his shoulders. Despite his tender age, he keenly felt the sting of ostracization and exclusion. Classmates whispered behind his back, parents pulled their children away when he approached, and teachers regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion. "Why do they hate us?" Antony would ask, his eyes brimming with confusion and hurt. Pavel would never even think to gather his son to his arms, or hold him close as if to shield him from the cruelty of the world outside. He would not be bothered to explain that they fear what they do not understand. Antony would just have to conclude, later as an adult, that he must not let their ignorance dim the light within him. And so, Antony endured, with his spirit unbroken, despite the constant barrage of prejudice. In the face of adversity, he clung to his mother, finding solace in the bonds of family, and the resilience of the human spirit. The prejudice against the Janovskis never did wane. It just slowly but surely eroded within Antony's mind, and formed an unyielding force of empathy and understanding towards others who were also discriminated against. Neighbors would never really venture to extend olive branches. Classmates would sometimes reach out with tentative gestures of friendship, and yet Mr. Thompson would never find himself even begrudgingly acknowledging the humanity of those whom he had vilified. And as for young Antony, he grew to understand that the true measure of a person lay not in the name they carried, or the sins of their ancestors, but in the kindness of their heart and the strength of their character. This contrasted with the usual mindset of judging the perceived offspring of former crooks as worse than the crooks they came from. But Antony knew that in the end, it was not the prejudices of others that defined him, but the love and acceptance he found within himself, and those who stood beside him having been spawned from the following events. Pavel's origins. As a selfish refugee from a Siberian gulag, Pavel changed his Ukrainian surname to a Polish name, to take advantage of the Sikorski-Mayski Agreement, which was concluded at the end of July 1941 between the USSR ambassador and the Prime Minister of the Polish government in exile, providing an opportunity to free hundreds of thousands of Polish citizens from labor camps and prisons. This pact enabled the establishment of Polish armed forces within the USSR, and strengthened the anti-Hitler coalition. By joining the Polish forces, Pavel was able to escape to the UK from Siberia in 1942 due to this edict from Stalin, but only after joining the Anders army of Polish soldiers under British command, then marrying a coal miner's daughter from Nottingham, as a Bevin boy and moving to London as a doorman in the Windmill Theatre, as his sojourn moved on. This was a man who, to get a better chance of remaining in the UK, impregnated a schizophrenic named Audrey, and used her insurance savings to get a divorce from his first wife Nellie, so he could make a marriage bond legal. Pavel, such a selfish gambling addict, that when his second son Antony was fostered into a caring couple's home, while Audrey was forced by Pavel into an asylum, he offered to give this expendable child away for £10, only to be heavily rebuked by Audrey, in a moment of clarity, as she would fight tooth and nail to prevent any such thing happening. How would Antony's life as the boy that Pavel did not need turn out? The following is a first-hand account of recollections from Antony, who today retains the strength of having been nurtured by the most loving mother a child could have ever had, and by a scheming father, who placed multiple challenges upon him along the way, seeking to distract him from any chance of progress through his childhood and teenage years. How would his life turn out while being treated as the offspring of Stalin within a biased society? Further to this, it is anyone's guess whether his father acquired his own values from an emulation of Stalin's reputation or his own ingenuity. So, was Pavel a child of Stalin? And was Antony treated by his UK peers as if he was a child of Stalin? You decide. Chapter 1. The Selfish Refugee. Pavel's journey from the icy clutches of the Siberian gulag to the bustling streets of Glasgow, then Nottingham and London, was one marked by selfish ambition and a callous disregard for others. Born with the Ukrainian name Yanovich, he shed his past like a snake casting off its old skin, adopting a Polish name Janowski as he sought refuge in the ranks of the Anders army under British command during the tumultuous days of World War II. His escape from Siberia was a feat of cunning and opportunism, seizing the chance to flee due to an edict agreed to between the Polish General Sikorski and Stalin that allowed him to join the Polish forces as they carved a path through the chaos of war. In the aftermath, after having assaulted British officers under the guise of having a mental illness, he was finally demobbed in Glasgow in 1942, and Pavel found himself in Nottingham, a city teeming with life and opportunity, where he soon crossed paths with a coal miner's daughter named Nellie. After whisking an already pregnant Nellie to London and ostracizing her from her family, she married Pavel after bearing her child, left him to his gambling ways, and moved to Hull when Pavel moved on to Audrey, who suffered from schizophrenia. Their courtship was swift, fueled by Pavel's charm and Audrey's youthful naivety. They married in haste, and for a time, it seemed as though Pavel had found the stability he craved. But beneath the surface, his selfish tendencies simmered, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Pavel's gambling addiction was the first crack in the facade of his newfound life. He squandered their meager savings on games of chance, his lust for risk blinding him to the needs of his growing family. As Audrey's belly swelled with the promise of new life, Pavel's debts mounted, casting a shadow over their future. After Pavel had fathered his first British child, it seems it was job done, as his tenure in the UK seemed much safer, although he still harbored fears of being found out about his name change in the gulags, and possibly caught by Stalin, who controlled the USSR in the years after the war. He was in a situation where the Polish government, as a satellite state of the USSR, were trying to get Poles, who had fought for the British, returned and punished as against the Soviet cause, even though Poland was not technically part of the USSR, and if that happened, his former identity as a Ukrainian may be exposed, and the thought of being back in Siberia would put him into a permanent fight or flight position with anyone getting in his way just becoming fodder in his aftermath. His attitude towards more offspring differed somewhat, and when their second son, Anthony, was born, Pavel's selfishness reached new heights. Faced with the responsibility of fatherhood towards another son, he recoiled, seeking solace in the chaos of his own making. Unable and unwilling to provide for his growing family, he made a fateful decision to offer Anthony up for adoption, a pawn in his relentless pursuit of self-gratification. Christopher and Emily, kind-hearted foster carers, welcomed Anthony into their home near Dover in Kent with open arms, offering him the love and stability that Pavel would not provide. As they bid farewell to the one-year-old boy they had grown to cherish, Pavel's indifference was palpable, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his mind already racing ahead to his next gamble. But Audrey would not be swayed. Faced with the prospect of losing her second son, she stood firm, refusing to let Pavel's selfishness dictate this fate. With steely resolve, she rejected his attempt to adopt Anthony for a mere £10 return, her voice a beacon of defiance in the face of his callousness. As they drove away from Christopher and Emily's home, the weight of Pavel's betrayal hung heavy in the air. In the silence that followed, Audrey's eyes met Pavel's in a silent challenge, a reminder that she would not be broken by his selfishness, that she would fight tooth and nail to protect her family from the darkness that threatened to consume them. And so, as they drove into the unknown, Pavel's selfishness remained a spectre haunting their every step, a reminder of the price they paid for daring to hope for something more than the hand that fate has dealt them. But in Audrey's unwavering resolve, there was also a glimmer of hope, a promise that even in the darkest of times, love could still triumph over selfishness and greed. Little did Anthony or Audrey know at the time, that 2 years later, Audrey would be forced to adopt her only daughter Vanessa, who was fostered out, and who Pavel was more determined to adopt into a wealthy home, only to pester these new parents of Vanessa, until they moved to Retford to get away from him. Pavel simply used the ensuing adoption hearing as an opportunity for a day out, exclaiming that if he did not get a day out of jail, he would oppose the adoption, thus showing how little he cared about his only known daughter and his wife's happiness. The implication is clear from an ensuing letter written to the child's social worker, that he would support the adoption of his and Audrey's only daughter Vanessa if he could just gain 12 hours out of his jail cell. Little did he know that these letters, along with the record of refusing his son Anthony a place at a prestigious grammar school, and attempting to sell him for £10 would be kept within a microfiche record, available for Anthony to review in later life. Chapter 2. The Deception. In the summer of 1964, innocence collided with deception in the life of young Anthony. It was a day etched into his memory, a day when promises of adventure masked the sinister truth lurking beneath the surface. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, a car pulled up to their modest home, a rare occurrence in their secluded corner of the world. Wide-eyed with wonder, 4-year-old Anthony watched as his father Pavel emerged from the car, accompanied by a stranger. Pavel's smile, though forced, promised excitement and adventure, as he beckoned Antony and his siblings to join them for a ride. Without hesitation, they climbed into the car, their excitement tinged with uncertainty. As they journeyed into the unknown, Antony's mind buzzed with questions, but his voice remained silenced by the weight of his father's authority. Hours passed, and the car finally came to a halt outside a looming building, an orphanage disguised as a sanctuary. Confusion gripped Antony's heart as Pavel ushered them inside, his assurances falling on deaf ears. It was a cruel trick, a ploy to rid himself of their burden, while he pursued his own desires. With tear-stained cheeks and trembling hands, Anthony clung to hope that this nightmare would soon end. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, trapping Anthony in a cycle of abandonment and betrayal. The following summer of 1966 brought a chilling sense of déjà vu as history repeated itself. Once again, Anthony and his siblings were torn from their home, without a chance to bid their mother farewell. Pavel's deceit knew no bounds as he callously deposited them at the doorstep of another foster home, his heart as cold as the Siberian tundra from which he hailed. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of resilience flickered within Antony's soul. With each passing day, he vowed to protect his siblings from the pain inflicted upon them by their parents' sins. Together, they forged a bond stronger than blood, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity. Despite the constant upheaval, Antony's spirit remained unbroken. Each new challenge only served to strengthen his resolve. And though scars from the past lingered, they were a testament to the enduring power of love in the face of adversity. Chapter 3: A Son's Defiance. One fateful morning, the air in the small household hung heavy with tension, thick like a suffocating fog. Pavel and Audrey, once bound by love, now found themselves locked in a bitter argument. Audrey lay sick in bed, her frail form hidden beneath layers of blankets, while Pavel stood by the door, his voice dripping with bitterness and frustration. "Come, boys," Pavel's words were cold and calculated. "It's time to leave your mother behind. She's too much of a burden for us to bear." But Antony couldn't bear to abandon his mother in her time of need. Despite his father's callous words, he could see the fear and confusion in Audrey's eyes. With a courage fueled by love, Antony stepped forward, his voice trembling but resolute. "I won't leave Mum," he declared, his gaze meeting Pavel's with unwavering intensity. "I'll stay with her, no matter what." Pavel's anger flared at Antony's defiance, his fists clenching in frustration. Yet beneath the facade of rage, Antony glimpsed something else, a hint of shame, a flicker of humanity. At that moment, Antony understood that his father's cruelty stemmed not from malice, but from his own pain and brokenness. And though he feared the consequences of his actions, he could not abandon his mother to face them alone. With a heavy sigh, Pavel relented, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Fine," he muttered, barely audible. "Stay with her, then? But know that you'll regret it." But Antony paid no heed to his father's warning, for in that moment, he had made a choice born of love and loyalty. As he wrapped his arms around his mother's trembling form, he knew he had made the right decision. Love, he realized, was the most powerful force of all, a beacon of hope even in the darkest of nights. As the years passed, Antony carried the scars of his tumultuous childhood. Yet amidst the chaos, he clung to the belief that one day, he would find the stability and love he craved. With courage and resilience, he faced the challenges ahead, determined to carve out a brighter future for himself and his siblings. For in the depths of his soul burned a flicker of hope, a light that would guide him through the darkest of nights. Chapter 4: The Sanctuary of Numbers. In the idyllic town of Margate, nestled among rolling hills and murmuring forests, resided a boy named Anthony. At just 8 years old, Anthony's life was a tapestry woven with threads of both love and hardship. His mother, Audrey, possessed a gentle soul overshadowed by the haunting spectre of schizophrenia. Despite her affliction, she enveloped Anthony in a cocoon of love and warmth, providing him with a sanctuary amidst the tempest that raged within their home. Yet alongside Audrey's tender embrace lurked the shadow of Pavel, Antony's father, a man whose heart was as frigid as ice, casting a pall of darkness over their family. His actions inflicted wounds that cut deep into the fabric of their lives. But amidst the turmoil and anguish, Antony found solace in the world of numbers. A prodigy in mathematics, his mind was a labyrinth of equations and calculations, offering him refuge from the tumultuous seas of his reality. Within the bustling halls of Sandstone Elementary School, Antony found sanctuary in the orderly realm of mathematics. He immersed himself in textbooks, his intellect aflame with the thrill of discovery. With each problem solved, he felt a sense of triumph coursing through his veins. And when he received his first double gold star for a flawless maths test, his heart swelled with pride. It was the day of his third triple gold star that shattered Antony's world. He had approached the test with meticulous care, his pencil tracing each equation with precision. But as he scanned the results, his heart plummeted. One simple sum had been marked incorrect, an error he knew he could not have made. The teacher claimed he had written a 3 that resembled an 8, but Antony recognized it as a facade, a ploy to placate the more affluent parents whose children vied for supremacy in the class rankings. Fury surged within Antony's chest as he confronted the injustice before him. He pleaded with the teacher, his voice trembling with emotion, but she remained unmoved. In her eyes, Antony was merely another troubled child from a fractured home, a statistic to be brushed aside and forgotten. Yet, Antony refused to yield to despair. With a resolute determination burning within him, he vowed to prove his worth, not only to his teacher but to himself. Late into the night, he pored over his textbooks, his mind ablaze with determination. He knew that nothing would thwart his dreams. For Antony was more than just a troubled child from a broken home. He was a mathematical prodigy, a force to be reckoned with, a beacon of hope in a world veiled in shadows. Though the road ahead promised trials and tribulations, Antony faced it with unwavering courage and resilience, his spirit unbroken by the injustices that sought to dim his light. Chapter 5: The Sting of Poverty's Awareness. At the tender age of 7, Antony found himself acutely aware of the harsh reality of poverty that cast a shadow over his young life. Despite his efforts to shield himself from the subject, his threadbare clothes and unkempt appearance betrayed his family's financial struggles more overtly than he realized. One fateful day, Antony eagerly joined an after-school pottery class, unaware that it would serve as a stark reminder of his impoverished status. As he molded clay into a whimsical piggy bank, he basked in the joy of creation, oblivious to the impending blow to his fragile self-esteem. Upon completing his creation, the instructor kindly suggested that Antony could use the slot on the piggy bank to store his pocket money. Though meant as a gesture of encouragement, the innocent remark pierced Antony's heart like a dagger. Rendered speechless, he stood in stunned silence for the remainder of the lesson, the weight of his poverty bearing down upon him with crushing force. Another painful reminder of his family's financial strain came when the school initiated a holiday savings plan. Encouraged to deposit 10 shillings a week, the other children eagerly embraced the opportunity to save for an exciting school trip abroad. Antony, desperate to participate, appealed to his selfish father, a compulsive gambler whose sporadic generosity offered fleeting hope. To Antony's astonishment, his father provided the initial 10 shillings, igniting a glimmer of hope within the young boy's heart. Yet, despite his fervent prayers for repeated acts of generosity, they never materialized. With each passing week, Antony's dreams of joining his peers on the coveted school trip dwindled. As the deadline for the savings plan loomed, Antony's heart ached with sorrow. The realization that he would be left behind, while his classmates embarked on an adventure abroad weighed heavily upon him, casting a pall of desolation over his young spirit. To compound his humiliation, Antony's father, Pavel, demanded a return of the 10 shillings he had initially provided, an act that left Antony feeling utterly dejected and ashamed. Forced to retrieve the paltry sum, Antony's sense of worth plummeted, reinforcing the bitter truth of his family's dire financial circumstances. Yet amidst the pain and humiliation, Antony clung to a flicker of resilience. Though poverty threatened to define his existence, he refused to surrender to despair. With a quiet resolve burning within him, he vowed to overcome the obstacles that stood in the way of his dreams, determined to carve out a brighter future for himself, despite the harsh realities of his upbringing. Chapter 6. The Weight of Broken Promises. At the tender age of 10, Anthony found himself thrust into the workforce, too young to work legally but desperate for a means to escape the suffocating grasp of poverty that choked his family. With determination etched into his young features, Anthony secured a job as a table-clearer dishwasher and operator of a heavy-duty potato-peeling machine, earning a modest wage of 4 shillings an hour, a meagre sum that represented a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness of his circumstances. His father, a figure consumed by selfishness and deceit, promised to safeguard Anthony's earnings, pledging to bank his wages every week until Anthony had accumulated £100, a lofty goal that required 500 hours of back-breaking labour to achieve. Yet Anthony toiled tirelessly, fueled by the promise of financial stability and the faint hope of a better future. But when the time came to reclaim his hard-earned money from his father's clutches, Anthony's hopes were dashed by the cruel reality of his father's addiction. It became painfully evident that his father had squandered the funds, lost to the insatiable appetite of gambling, each pound frittered away on fleeting moments of false promise, leaving Anthony bereft of the fruits of his labour. The betrayal cut deep, reminiscent of past wounds inflicted by his father's deceitful machinations. Memories flooded Anthony's mind, like the time he sold his cherished Rawley chopper bicycle for £10, naively believing his father's assurances of a better replacement. Instead, his father seized the money under the guise of securing a superior tape recorder, only to return home with a subpar model purchased on hire purchase, an illusion shattered within weeks as the device was repossessed, leaving Anthony empty-handed and disheartened. Now as Anthony watched his friend gleefully riding the Rawley chopper he had sold, the sting of betrayal bit deeper than ever before. He was left without a bike, without a tape recorder, and without the £10 he had sacrificed in pursuit of his father's empty promises. Yet amidst the wreckage of broken dreams, Anthony's spirit remained unbroken. Though battered and bruised by the callousness of his father's actions, he refused to surrender to despair. With a steely resolve burning within him, Anthony vowed to rise above the betrayal, determined to forge a path to a brighter future, guided by the unwavering strength of his own resilience. Chapter 7. The Triumphs and Tribulations of Adolescence. At the age of 11, Anthony found himself on the precipice of adolescence, navigating a world fraught with both triumphs and tribulations. The previous year had been marked by disappointment, as he missed out on a school trip abroad, a dream dashed by the failures of his father, Pavel, a cunning and selfish deviant, whose actions often left Anthony grappling with the repercussions. However, a glimmer of hope emerged from the shadows in the form of Anthony's caring uncle, the compassionate brother of his schizophrenic mother, Audrey. Despite Pavel's shortcomings, Anthony's uncle stepped in, channeling the full £18.70 into the school's accounts, ensuring Anthony could partake in the much-anticipated trip. With newfound optimism coursing through his veins, Anthony embarked on the journey with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Determined to make the most of the opportunity, Anthony utilized an advance payment from his uncle to purchase new attire from an ironically named shop, Foster Brothers. Clad in fresh flannel trousers, a pair of more expensive flared trousers, and a smart cardigan, Anthony sought to shed the trappings of his poverty-stricken upbringing, desperate to avoid standing out among his peers. However, fate had other plans as a small patch of tar stained Anthony's trousers during a leisurely afternoon on a French beach. Undeterred, Anthony adopted a posh accent and playfully referred to his classmates as Old Bin, eliciting amusement and irritation in equal measure. Despite the minor hiccup, the trip proved to be a transformative experience for Anthony. He unwittingly found himself in possession of a newfound wealth following a poker game among the boys, enabling him to indulge in souvenirs, including a large ornamental smoking pipe, a cherished memento of his time abroad. Yet Anthony's newfound prosperity did not escape the notice of his teacher, Mr. Bird, whose accusations of theft cast a shadow over Anthony's enjoyment of the trip. Only when the missing purse was miraculously found did Anthony find temporary reprieve from Mr. Bird's unwarranted suspicions. Returning home, Anthony's elation was short-lived as he discovered the harsh realities awaiting him, a home devoid of electricity and a TV sold by his father in a futile attempt to alleviate their financial woes. As Anthony returned from the school trip abroad, a sense of contentment settled within him. The experience had been a rare escape from the confines of his everyday life, a chance to explore new places and create lasting memories. Yet amidst the glow of satisfaction, a dark cloud loomed on the horizon. The joy of the trip was soon overshadowed by a bitter altercation with his brother, a petty squabble that escalated into a heated argument. In the heat of the moment, a prized souvenir, an ornamental smoking pipe, met its untimely demise, shattered into irreparable pieces. The loss left Anthony dismayed, the tangible reminder of his journey now reduced to mere fragments of shattered dreams. As if the blow of the broken pipe wasn't enough, Anthony found himself subjected to further humiliation upon his return to school. Mr. Bird, ever eager to showcase the school's achievements, gathered the students for an assembly to relive the highlights of the trip through a series of projected photographs. However, what should have been a moment of shared camaraderie quickly turned sour as Mr. Bird seized upon a photo depicting Anthony by the River Seine in Paris. With a cruel twist of humor, Mr. Bird mocked the river's murky waters, likening them to Anthony's presence and implying that Anthony had somehow tainted the very essence of this iconic landmark. The taunting remarks cut deep, plunging Anthony into a pool of embarrassment and shame. The laughter of his peers echoed in his ears, a stark reminder of his outsider status in a world where he longed to belong. Despite the setbacks and indignities he faced, Anthony refused to be defeated. With each challenge, he found strength and resilience, determined to rise above the obstacles that threatened to hold him back. And as he navigated the tumultuous waters of adolescence, he clung to the hope that one day, he would emerge from the shadows, triumphant in his pursuit of a brighter future. Chapter 8: The Dreamer's Basement. In the heart of Margate in Kent, where the sun cast long shadows and whispers of dreams mingled with the breeze, a young Anthony found himself drawn to a world of wonder and possibility. His own upbringing, marked by the harsh realities of a conniving father and a schizophrenic mother, left him yearning for the warmth and stability that seemed to elude him at every turn. It was on one fateful afternoon that Anthony stumbled upon a sanctuary, unlike any he had known before, a basement nestled beneath the bustling streets, where the echoes of laughter and the scent of creativity filled the air like magic. Here in the loving embrace of Dominic's home, Anthony found solace in the company of a boy whose world seemed to shimmer with promise and potential. Dominic, with his stable and loving parents, inhabited a realm far removed from the chaos of Anthony's own upbringing. While his father played the organ and his mother hired out deck chairs, Dominic worked tirelessly in the basement, honing his skills in acting and directing with a fervor that bordered on obsession. As Anthony watched in awe, Dominic manipulated figurines upon a miniature stage, weaving tales of adventure and intrigue with a dexterity that belied his tender age. In those fleeting moments, Anthony caught a glimpse of a future far beyond the confines of Margate, a future where Dominic's boundless imagination would carry him to heights he had only dared to dream of. It was no surprise to Anthony when he learned that Dominic had secured a role in a Stanley Kubrick film, a testament to his prodigious talent and unwavering determination. And though their time together was brief, Anthony carried with him the memory of Dominic's boundless ambition, a reminder of the power of dreams to transcend even the darkest of circumstances. Dominic's basement is a past memory of sanctuary, where boundaries of reality melt away, and anything seemed possible. And though their paths diverged as quickly as they had merged, Anthony never forgot a lesson learned in that basement. With passion and perseverance, even the loftiest of dreams could become reality. Chapter 9: The Quest for Opportunity. Despite the daunting challenges looming over his life, Anthony harbored an insatiable thirst for knowledge, and a fierce determination that burned like a beacon within him. In the shadow of poverty that had plagued his family for generations, Anthony saw education as his escape route, a chance to break free from the shackles of circumstance, and carve out a brighter future for himself. When the opportunity arose for him to sit the 11+ test, Anthony seized it with both hands, viewing it as his ticket to a realm beyond the confines of his small-town existence. With unwavering resolve, he dedicated himself wholeheartedly to his studies, filling his days with tireless hours of revision and preparation. Every page turned, every equation solved, brought him one step closer to his dreams. As the day of the test dawned, Anthony approached it with a quiet confidence, his heart buoyed by the hope of what lay ahead. Weeks passed in anxious anticipation until finally, the letter arrived bearing the news of his fate. With trembling hands, he tore it open, his eyes scanning the words with a mixture of disbelief and elation. He had passed the 11+ test with flying colors, his ticket to a place at the prestigious grammar school now within reach. But Anthony's joy was short-lived as he shared the news with his family. Instead of the expected celebration, he was met with silence from his father Pavel, whose face remained impassive. When Anthony broached the subject of enrolling in the grammar school, Pavel's responses were vague and evasive, shrouded in half-truths and excuses. For years, Anthony puzzled over the mystery of why he had been denied the opportunity to pursue the education he had worked so hard to attain. While his friends moved on to higher education and promising careers, Anthony felt trapped in a cycle of stagnation, his aspirations stifled by the limitations of his circumstances. It wasn't until Anthony stood on the cusp of adulthood that the truth finally came to light. A chance encounter with an old family friend unveiled the dark reality behind Pavel's actions. Driven by selfish desires and a misguided attempt to save money on a weekly bus ticket, Pavel had deliberately sabotaged Anthony's chances of attending the grammar school. The revelation hit Anthony like a sledgehammer, filling him with a potent mix of anger and sorrow. He realized that his father's actions had robbed him of opportunities and dreams that he had fought so hard to achieve. But amidst the turmoil of emotions, Anthony also found a glimmer of liberation, a resolve to chart his own course, independent of the shadows that had long haunted his past. With newfound determination, Anthony set out to pursue his aspirations with renewed vigor. Each setback only fueled his determination to rise above the limitations imposed upon him. As he ventured into the uncharted territory of his future, Anthony carried with him the unwavering belief that no obstacle, no matter how formidable, could extinguish the flame of his dreams. Chapter 10. A Turn of Events. At just 12 years old, Anthony's life veered off course, plunging him into a reality he never could have foreseen. It all began innocently enough, a carefree morning spent with friends, the air alive with laughter and youthful energy. But as the day wore on and the sun dipped lower in the sky, Anthony found himself swept up in a whirlwind of events that would alter the course of his existence forever. It started with a dare, a reckless challenge from a friend to partake in a mischievous escapade. The allure of adventure, coupled with the rush of adrenaline, proved too tempting for Anthony to resist. Without a second thought, he accepted, unaware of the grave consequences that lay ahead. As he climbed onto the moped, a sense of unease settled in the pit of Anthony's stomach. Deep down, he knew that what he was doing was wrong, but the idea of the thrill of the moment drowned out his better judgment. With his heart pounding in his chest, he never could have imagined the series of events that would unfold. Unbeknownst to Anthony, his friend carried incriminating evidence in his pocket, car keys that tied them to a larger crime. In a twist of fate, Anthony found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, ensnared in a web of circumstances beyond his control. Arrested and charged with taking a conveyance and going equipped for theft, Anthony's protests of innocence fell on deaf ears. Faced with overwhelming odds and the stock realities of the legal system, his legal team advised him to plead guilty, a decision born out of desperation and the harsh truths of the world he inhabited. Standing before the judge, Anthony felt the weight of the moment bearing down upon him. With a heavy heart and a sense of resignation, he uttered the words that sealed his fate. His plea of guilty echoed through the courtroom, a solemn reminder of the injustice that had befallen him. Yet, even as the gavel fell and the sentence was handed down, Anthony refused to surrender to despair. Deep within his soul burned a flicker of hope, a steadfast belief that one day, justice would prevail, and his name would be vindicated. Though the road ahead stretched long and arduous, fraught with obstacles and challenges, Anthony faced it with unwavering courage and determination. His spirit remained unbroken by the weight of his unjust conviction, fueled by the conviction that truth would ultimately triumph over adversity. As he embarked on the journey ahead, Anthony carried with him the indomitable belief that the light of justice would shine through the darkness, illuminating the path to redemption, and setting him free from the chains of injustice. Chapter 11. The Misguided Joyride. At the age of 14, Anthony found himself caught up in a whirlwind of trouble that would forever alter the course of his life. It all began with a seemingly innocent act, a joyride with 3 of his closest friends through a gated and locked goods yard on the outskirts of Margate seafront. It was a warm summer evening when Anthony and his friends stumbled upon the goods yard, its towering fences and forbidding gates standing as a challenge to their youthful curiosity. With a sense of reckless abandon, they scaled the fence and slipped inside, the thrill of adventure coursing through their veins. As they explored the maze of shipping containers and abandoned machinery, Anthony couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration at the thought of breaking the rules and defying the boundaries that had been placed upon them. And when they stumbled upon a van parked in a secluded corner of the yard, temptation got the better of them. With a mischievous grin, Anthony and his friends climbed into the van, the engine roaring to life beneath their touch. And with a sense of freedom that only comes from youth, they set off on a joyride through the deserted yard, the wind rushing through their hair as they careened around corners and raced down narrow alleyways. But as the night wore on and the adrenaline faded, the reality of their actions began to sink in. They realized too late that they were trapped within the confines of the goods yard, the gates locked tight against any would-be escapees. In their panic, Anthony and his friends made a fateful decision. They purposely drove the van towards the wooded dead end, thus showing they were not heading towards the locked gates, and sought refuge in the shadows, hoping to evade capture. But their fortune ran out when the police drove towards them, responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area. And so, Anthony and his friends found themselves in the back of a police car, their hands bound with handcuffs and their hearts heavy with fear. They were charged with taking away a vehicle, a crime that carried serious consequences. But as they sat in their jail cell, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling of injustice that gnawed at his conscience. He knew that they hadn't stolen the van, they had simply taken it for a joyride around a private piece of land, with no intention of causing harm or breaking the law. As the days turned into weeks and the reality of their situation sunk in, Anthony and his friends grappled with the harsh consequences of their actions. They faced court hearings and legal battles, their futures hanging in the balance as they awaited their fate. But through it all, Anthony remained steadfast in his belief that they had done nothing wrong. And though their joyride had landed them in hot water, he refused to let it define him. For Anthony knew that true strength lay not in the mistakes we make, but in the lessons we learn and the resilience we show in the face of adversity. Chapter 12, The Art of Ink. Anthony's 13th year was marked by a daring adventure that left a permanent mark on his body and his spirit. It all began with a chance encounter in the heart of Brooksville, a small tattoo parlor tucked away in a forgotten alley, its walls adorned with colorful designs and swirling patterns. With a heart pounding with excitement, Anthony stepped into the dimly lit parlor, his eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the intricate designs that adorned the walls. The tattoo artist, a grizzled man with a twinkle in his eye, greeted him with a knowing smile, his hands steady and sure as he prepared his tools. Anthony, always one to seek out new experiences, found himself drawn to the idea of getting a tattoo. With a confidence that belied his age, he convinced the tattoo artist that he was 18, his tall stature and mature demeanor lending credence to his claim. And so, with a sense of anticipation coursing through his veins, Anthony settled into the chair, his heart racing as the tattoo artist began to work his magic. With each prick of the needle, he felt a thrill unlike anything he had ever experienced before, his skin coming alive with the vibrant colors and intricate designs that adorned it. The first tattoo, a simple bust of a flowered lady, seemed to spring to life beneath Anthony's skin, its delicate features dancing in the flickering light of the parlor. The second, a flowered scroll with his name emblazoned upon it, held a special significance, a symbol of his identity and his place in the world. But it was the third tattoo that truly captivated Anthony, a large parrot that tucked its wings down his upper arm, its feathers ablaze with color and life. As the tattoo artist worked his magic, Anthony felt a sense of exhilaration wash over him, a feeling of freedom and self-expression that he had never known before. And so, with a sense of pride and accomplishment, Anthony left the tattoo parlor that day with 3 new tattoos adorning his arms, a testament to his bravery and his willingness to embrace the unknown. As he returned to school, his classmates were enthralled by the colorful designs that now adorned his skin, their eyes wide with wonder as they traced their fingers over the intricate patterns. And though Anthony basked in their admiration, he knew that his journey with tattoos was far from over. But it was during a return visit to the tattoo parlor that Anthony's addiction to ink was finally tempered by the wisdom of the tattoo artist. With a gentle hand and a knowing smile, the artist insisted that Anthony take a break, allowing his body to adjust to the changes wrought by the tattoos. And though Anthony initially balked at the idea, he soon realized the wisdom of the tattoo artist's words. For it was in that moment of reflection that Anthony found a newfound appreciation for the art of ink, a respect for its power to transform and to inspire, but also a recognition of the importance of moderation and self-care. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Anthony embarked on a new chapter of his life, one marked not by addiction, but by a tempered respect for the art of tattooing, and a commitment to honor its beauty and its significance with every design that adorned his skin, but at the same time a realization that being tattooed at 13 would be a mark or two for life. Chapter 13. The Unjust Confinement. At the tender age of 14, Anthony found himself entangled in a web of injustice that would forever stain his perception of authority and law. It began with a simple utterance, a word spoken in jest, but twisted into a weapon against him. It was a brisk afternoon when Anthony and his friend found themselves strolling through the streets of Brooksville, their laughter echoing through the air like music. But their carefree demeanor was shattered in an instant when they encountered a police officer on patrol, a stern figure with a badge gleaming on his chest. In a moment of impulsive defiance, Anthony called out to the officer, addressing him as constable with a playful emphasis on the first syllable. To Anthony, it was nothing more than a harmless jest, a light-hearted poke at the authority that loomed over him like a spectre. There were no other persons within earshot, and the officer warned Anthony and his friend not to do that again. When the officer turned his back, Anthony called out constable with an emphasis on the first syllable, again without any real chance that others in the vicinity could be offended. The officer was not pleased. As the officer saw it differently, he seized upon Anthony's words with a ferocity that took Anthony by surprise, accusing him of deliberately emphasizing the syllable to create a derogatory term that would incite a breach of the peace. Suddenly, Anthony found himself facing a barrage of accusations and threats of arrest, his protestations falling on deaf ears, as the officer painted a picture of a volatile situation on the brink of chaos, a scenario that existed only in the officer's imagination. Faced with the prospect of arrest, Anthony made a split-second decision to protect his friend, owning up to the supposed offense in a bid to spare them both from the clutches of the law, and with the conviction that he had not incited a potential riot, but just upset an officer of the law. But even as he was led away in handcuffs, Anthony couldn't shake the sense of disbelief that washed over him, a feeling of betrayal at the hands of those sworn to uphold justice. In court, Anthony's ordeal only intensified as he faced a magistrate, who seemed determined to make an example of him. When asked if he had emphasized the first syllable of the word constable, Anthony dared to question the absurdity of the accusation in such a way as to encourage the magistrate to give an example, only to be met with a torrent of anger and contempt from the bench. And so, Anthony was sentenced to 3 months in jail, a punishment that far outweighed the supposed offense he had committed. But even as he languished behind bars, Anthony refused to surrender to despair. With a determination born of injustice, he fought tooth and nail to appeal his sentence, tirelessly seeking justice in a system that had failed him. Although his appeal against the sentence was ultimately successful, with his sentence reduced to a mere 10 days, the scars of his wrongful imprisonment would linger long after his release. For Anthony knew that true justice could never be served until those responsible for his suffering were held to account. Had he truly been guilty of potentially disturbing the peace, this would imply that the officer himself would have breached the peace due to Anthony's mischievousness. When the appeals month into the sentence, the conviction issue was not even considered. As he emerged from his ordeal, Anthony vowed to never forget the injustice he had endured, to never lose sight of the fight for fairness and equality that had been ignited within him. And as he stood on the threshold of a new beginning, he knew that his journey was far from over, but he would face it with courage and determination, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. Chapter 14. The Temptation of Easy Money. At the tender age of 15, Anthony found himself ensnared in the allure of quick riches. Surrounded by youths driven by reckless ambition, he succumbed to the temptation of burglary. Led by misguided camaraderie, Anthony and his companions embarked on a fateful journey into the realm of criminality. Their target, a nondescript shop, oblivious to the impending intrusion. As Anthony, ignorant amongst his friends, looked on, a clandestine operation unfolded beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to him, the basement of the shop had become a treasure trove ripe for plunder. All that was required was for Anthony and another to spend time and money in the shop, and whilst completing their purchases, two of the others went downstairs and out of the rear alley. After their exploits, they retreated to Anthony's humble abode, a sanctuary overshadowed by his father's selfish compulsions and his mother's tender but troubled presence. Behind locked doors, they tallied the spoils of their illicit endeavor, counting out £220 each, a sum that tantalized with the promise of newfound wealth. But fate had a cruel twist in store. A nod to the police from one who seemed to be Anthony's closest friend shattered his illusions of prosperity. A trusted confidant who had not been involved in the heist, swayed by envy, betrayed him to the authorities. Before he could revel in his ill-gotten gains, Anthony found himself shackled by the chains of justice, arrested and convicted for handling stolen goods. When the police had come knocking, they did not search his room, but went straight to a small drawer, pulled it out and retrieved the remaining £180 of his share, but declared only £60 as handled by Anthony, which begged the question, was the day of capture a bonus day for the police? And perhaps even for his so-called best friend. When the newspapers summarized the matter, the total stolen was £300 short of the amount that had been shared out in Anthony's bedroom. Although the police had initially known the full amount, as when they confronted Anthony with the theft, he owned up to the full amount, which was initially recorded as the amount he was to be charged with, until they dropped the charge to the handling of £60 of stolen cash. This further injustice, however, did little to ease the sense of regret over his involvement in the whole affair. As the dust settled, Anthony grappled with the weight of guilt and remorse. The shop owner's loss weighed heavily on his conscience, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. Though he had only indulged in a fraction of the stolen loot, the burden of complicity bore down upon him, haunting his every waking moment until it gradually subsided into a past memory. Chapter 15. A life marked by turmoil. Anthony's tumultuous journey through life had thus far borne the scars of a fractured childhood, marred by insanity and uncertainty. Conceived into chaos, having teetered on the precipice of despair, he was a pawn in what seemed a game of fate. From the tender age of 1, Anthony's life had hung in the balance as his schizophrenic mother intervened to halt his sale. Yet the spectre of separation loomed large, as he was whisked away from her loving embrace time and time again, cast into the unforgiving arms of foster care. Amidst the chaos, Anthony's spirit remained unbroken. Refusing to be torn from his mother's side, he clung to her love as a lifeline in the storm. Despite the turmoil that engulfed him, Anthony's resilience shone through, a beacon of hope in the darkest of nights. But the shadows of adversity continued to loom large. From false accusations to violent encounters, Anthony's path was fraught with obstacles at every turn. Despite his innocence, he found himself ensnared in a web of injustice, betrayed by those entrusted with upholding the law. Yet amidst the chaos and turmoil, glimmers of hope pierced through the darkness. He was one day to be acquitted by a jury of his peers, and vindicated by the truth. Anthony emerged from the crucible of adversity stronger than ever, his spirit unbroken by the trials of life. 16. The quest for redemption. Haunted by the ghosts of his past, Anthony embarked on a quest for redemption, seeking solace in the aftermath of his transgressions. As he grappled with the weight of guilt and remorse, he found himself at a crossroads, torn between the allure of easy riches and the pursuit of a higher purpose. Reflecting on his misdeeds, Anthony gleaned invaluable lessons from the crucible of adversity. Though the allure of wealth had once beckoned him with its siren song, he now saw through its hollow promises, recognizing that true happiness could never be bought with ill-gotten gains. Driven by a newfound sense of purpose, Anthony resolved to chart a different course, guided by the moral compass instilled by his mother's love. Though the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, he faced it with courage and conviction, determined to atone for his past sins and forge a brighter future. With each step forward, Anthony sought to make amends for the harm he had caused, striving to leave behind a legacy of redemption in the wake of his tumultuous past. Though the scars of his journey would forever mark his soul, he embraced them as a testament to his resilience and strength in the face of adversity. Chapter 17. A Life Unraveled. Anthony's life had always been a precarious balancing act, teetering on the edge of chaos and uncertainty. Born into a world where the whispers of his mother's schizophrenia and the shadow of his father's vengeful past loomed large, Anthony navigated a landscape fraught with pitfalls and obstacles at every turn. Despite the love of his mother, whose tender heart struggled to make sense of the demons that haunted her mind, and the erratic affection of his father, whose vices threatened to consume him whole, Anthony found himself adrift in a sea of turmoil and despair. As he grew older, the spectre of his father's gambling addiction and criminal past cast a long shadow over Anthony's own life, leading him down a path lined with temptation and danger. 2 jail sentences, supervision orders, and a conditional discharge marked the milestones of Anthony's tumultuous journey, a journey fraught with missteps and mistakes that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But it was the events of one fateful day that would irrevocably alter the course of Anthony's life, a day when a simple misunderstanding spiraled into a nightmare of violence and betrayal. His headmaster, perhaps well-intentioned but ultimately misguided, sent a damning report to the court, a report that painted Anthony as abusive and unruly, a menace to society and himself. But the truth was far more complex, far more insidious than anyone could have imagined. The ex-police officer turned teacher, fueled by his own insecurities and prejudices, had unjustly punished Anthony for a crime he did not commit, a crime born not out of malice, but out of a desperate plea for understanding and compassion. As Anthony's raised hand was mistaken for a sign of guilt, the teacher's fury knew no bounds, and in a fit of rage, he unleashed a torrent of violence upon Anthony's unsuspecting frame. The sound of breaking teeth echoed through the classroom, a chilling reminder of the injustice that had been wrought upon Anthony's fragile soul. And so as Anthony found himself the subject of a care order, his future hanging in the balance, he clung to the flickering flame of hope that burned bright within him, a flame fueled by the unwavering belief that justice would one day prevail, and that the truth would set him free. But as the shadows closed in around him, Anthony knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, a road that would test his resilience and his resolve, and force him to confront the demons that had long haunted his past. Chapter 18. A Cry for Justice Chapter. The day came where he would be sentenced for receiving £60, when in fact it had been £40 spent of £220, and in the hushed confines of the courtroom, Anthony's fate hung in the balance, a fate dictated not by the truth, but by the whims of those who held his future in their hands. As the magistrates peered down from their lofty perch, Anthony braced himself for the inevitable verdict, a verdict that would seal his fate, and determine the course of his life for years to come. But as the evidence unfolded and the tangled web of deceit began to unravel, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a hope born from the courage of one young boy's refusal to be silenced, to be swept aside like so much dust in the wind. The truth, it seemed, was a fickle mistress, shifting and changing with each passing moment. And as the ex-police officer turned teacher took the stand, his facade of authority crumbling beneath the weight of his own guilt and shame, Anthony found his voice, a voice that rang out like a clarion call in the silence of the courtroom. With each word that spilled from his lips, Anthony painted a vivid portrait of the injustice that had been inflicted upon him, a portrait stained with the blood of broken teeth and shattered dreams. And as the echoes of his testimony reverberated through the chamber, a sense of righteous indignation swelled within the hearts of those who bore witness to his courage. For Anthony, the courtroom became a battlefield, a battleground where truth and justice clashed with the forces of corruption and deceit. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, he knew that he would not walk it alone, that the strength of his convictions and the fire in his heart would guide him through the darkness and lead him towards the light of a brighter tomorrow. As the judge handed down his care order, a sense of defeat washed over Anthony, and not a sense of triumph born from the knowledge that he had stood his ground, although he refused to be silenced in the face of injustice. Although he should not have, he emerged from the courtroom, His head held high and his spirit unbroken, Anthony knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage and determination, and never waver in his quest for truth and justice. Chapter 19. A Twist of Fate. As the care order loomed over Anthony's life like a dark cloud, he couldn't help but feel a sense of resignation wash over him. Despite his initial resistance to the idea of being taken into care, he couldn't deny the need and the possibilities it presented, particularly the chance to attend the grammar school he had been unfairly denied at the age of 11. With his brother already placed in care, Anthony knew that his own fate hung in the balance, tethered to the whims of a system that seemed determined to thwart his every ambition. But as the prospect of a care home placement beckoned, Anthony found himself torn between the comfort of familiarity and the promise of a brighter future. However, fate had other plans in store for Anthony, as his father and the conniving court clerk conspired to manipulate the situation to their advantage. Together, they crafted a plan to deceive the authorities into allowing Anthony to remain at home under the guise of a shortage of available care places, a plan that ultimately succeeded in thwarting the intentions of the care order. Though Anthony couldn't help but feel a twinge of relief at the prospect of remaining at home, he couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. For while the immediate danger of being taken into care had been averted, the long-term consequences of his father's machinations remained to be seen. Chapter 20. A Fragile Facade. As Anthony settled back into the familiar routines of home life, a fragile facade of normalcy descended over the household, a facade that belied the simmering tension that lurked just beneath the surface. With the threat of the care order temporarily averted, Anthony's father breathed a sigh of relief, secure in the knowledge that his national assistance payments would remain intact. But for Anthony, the illusion of stability was shattered by the harsh reality of his circumstances. Though he longed for the chance to pursue his dreams and carve out a better future for himself, he found himself trapped in a cycle of dysfunction and deceit, a cycle perpetuated by the very people who should have been his staunchest allies. As the days turned into weeks, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time, that with each passing moment, his chances of breaking free from the confines of his upbringing grew slimmer. And though he clung to the hope that someday, somehow, he would find a way to escape the shadows that threatened to consume him, he couldn't help but fear that his dreams would remain forever out of reach. Chapter 21. A Desperate Gamble. As the weight of his circumstances bore down upon him, Anthony found himself teetering on the brink of despair, a despair born from the realization that the odds were stacked against him, and that the cards had been dealt long before he ever had a chance to play the game. But in the face of adversity, Anthony refused to surrender to defeat. With a steely resolve, and a determination forged in the crucible of hardship, he resolved to defy the odds and carve out a path for himself, no matter the cost. Yet fate had one final twist in store for Anthony, as a chance encounter with a police officer would set into motion a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. Charged with the offense of swearing at an officer, Anthony found himself once again thrust into the unforgiving embrace of the justice system, a system that seemed determined to crush his spirit and extinguish the flame of hope that burned within him. But even as he stood on the precipice of despair, Anthony refused to back down. With the strength of his convictions as his guide, he vowed to fight tooth and nail for the chance to reclaim his future and defy the odds that threatened to consume him. For Anthony knew that while the road ahead might be fraught with obstacles and challenges, he would never surrender to the darkness, not as long as the flame of hope burned bright within his heart, lighting the way towards a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 22. The Care Order's Deception. As the care order loomed over Anthony's life like a dark shadow, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that gripped his heart. The prospect of being placed into care, away from the familiar comforts of home, filled him with dread and apprehension. Yet little did he know the true extent of the deception that awaited him. The court order had been meticulously worded to place Anthony, initially into the care of the police, which was a harsh reality that he seemingly couldn't escape. But when the clerk of the court sidestepped this directive with a cunning maneuver citing no available spaces, Anthony found himself caught in a web of deceit that would again shape his future in ways he could never have imagined. Despite the fact that he technically remained in the care of the police, Anthony was allowed to return home under the guise of a lack of placement options. The clock of the court's manipulation of the situation allowed Anthony to slip through the cracks of the system, avoiding the fate of institutionalization that had loomed so menacingly before him. But as Anthony settled back into the familiar routines of home life, a gnawing sense of unease lingered in the back of his mind. Something didn't feel quite right about the way his care order had been handled, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being kept in the dark about something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Little did Anthony know, the very system designed to protect him had failed him in the most egregious of ways, as the local social services feigned compliance with the care order, fabricating paperwork to make it appear as though Anthony had been in their care for years, a deception that would have far-reaching consequences for Anthony's future. Chapter 23. The Illusion of Normalcy. With the immediate threat of being placed into care seemingly averted, Anthony breathed a sigh of relief as he settled back into the familiar rhythms of home life. But beneath the facade of normalcy, a storm was brewing, a storm of deceit and manipulation that threatened to tear Anthony's world apart. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The care order, once a looming spectre that haunted his waking moments, had faded into the background, replaced by the illusion of normalcy that had settled over his life like a thick fog. Yet despite the outward appearance of stability, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that he was being kept in the dark about something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. The fabricated paperwork and feigned compliance of the local social services painted a false picture of Anthony's circumstances, obscuring the truth of his precarious situation. But as Anthony delved deeper into the tangled web of deception that surrounded him, he began to unravel the threads of deceit that had ensnared him. With each revelation, the illusion of normalcy shattered, revealing the harsh reality of his circumstances in stark relief. Chapter 24. The Weight of Deception. As Anthony grappled with the weight of this deception thrust upon him, he found himself teetering on the edge of despair, a despair born from the realization that the very system designed to protect him had failed him in the most egregious of ways. The fabricated paperwork and feigned compliance of the local social services painted a damning portrait of the lengths to which they would go to conceal the truth of Anthony's circumstances. It was a betrayal of trust that cut deep, leaving Anthony reeling from the realization that he had been kept in the dark about the true extent of his situation. But amidst the turmoil and uncertainty that surrounded him, Anthony refused to succumb to despair. With a steely resolve, and a determination forged in the crucible of hardship, he vowed to uncover the truth and reclaim control over his own destiny. Armed with the knowledge of the deception that had been perpetrated against him, Anthony set out on a journey of self-discovery, a journey that would lead him to confront the demons of his past, and forge a path towards a brighter future. For Anthony knew that while the road ahead might be fraught with obstacles and challenges, he would not walk it alone. With the strength of his convictions as his guide, he would navigate the treacherous waters of deception and emerge victorious, reclaiming his autonomy and his rightful place in the world. His father persuaded the clock to leave Anthony at home, so he could claim the family allowance payments. Chapter 25. The Midnight Ride. The seafront was shrouded in darkness, as Anthony toiled away behind the counter of a takeaway burger and fries joint, the scent of grease and fried food hanging heavy in the air. His eyes flickered anxiously towards the window, where his prized XS 650cc Yamaha motorcycle stood parked, a silent sentinel against the night. As the clock struck midnight, Anthony locked up the shop and grabbed 2 crash helmets, eager to escape the monotony of his shift and feel the wind whipping through his hair as he rode along the deserted streets. His friend eagerly hopped onto the back of the bike, anticipation shining in his eyes as they roared off into the night. But their joyride was short-lived, as the sound of screeching tires and flashing headlights shattered the stillness of the night. An unmarked car bore down on them, its headlights blazing with menace as it barreled towards them with reckless abandon. Anthony's heart hammered in his chest as he realized they were being pursued, the roar of the engine drowned out by the pounding of his pulse. In a panic, he flicked off the bike's headlights, hoping to evade their pursuers in the darkness. But fate had other plans, as a faulty indicator stubbornly remained lit, casting a damning glow that betrayed their position to their assailants. Desperate for refuge, Anthony spotted a cordon of police officers stationed near Margate Football Club, their presence offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness. With a surge of relief, Anthony steered towards the safety of the officers, his heart pounding with the promise of salvation. But as they approached, his hopes were dashed in an instant, as the unmarked car careered towards them with lethal intent. In a flash of chaos and violence, Anthony and his friend realized they had been chased by an unmarked police car, and found themselves under attack by more officers, their helmets ripped from their heads, as blows rained down upon them with brutal force. Anthony's refusal to remove his full-face helmet only seemed to enrage their attackers further, as they beat him mercilessly with their truncheons. For what felt like an eternity, Anthony was trapped in a nightmare of pain and confusion, his world reduced to a blur of flashing lights and bloodied fists. But as suddenly as it had begun, the onslaught came to an end, leaving Anthony battered and bruised, but defiant in the face of his attackers. As he emerged from the chaos, Anthony was filled with a sense of outrage and betrayal, his faith in the system shattered by the brutality he had endured. And though he was eventually released without charge, the scars of that fateful night would haunt him for years to come, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, ready to pounce when least expected. When you bear the above in mind, consider the ethics of how Anthony has been treated. He would be the first to acknowledge that his challenging behavior needed to be restrained, and that as much as his mother would have preferred him to have avoided trouble at school, or with the authorities, she had no power of discipline while Pavel ruled with an iron fist, and to make it worse, Pavel's discipline only suited himself and when Anthony and his brother interfered with Pavel's own selfish pursuits, there was no long-term gain to be had by grabbing a belt, and unleashing his vile temper and anger simply because Anthony had been to the beach and lost a shoe in the mud, but that is how Pavel was when any form of unnecessary expense was placed upon him. The idea of responsibility and reward was not something Pavel had ever considered, and when it came to something like buying their first bikes, it was inevitable that the hire purchase loan company would, after a couple of weeks of non-payment, take these fickle gestures away from the boys. This pattern would repeat itself when their pet dog was apparently lost or ran away, and in time it was found that it was more than likely abandoned, due to the responsibility of purchasing dog food. So when Anthony and his brother walked out of a store with water pistols they had not paid for at the age of 7 and 8, it would be no surprise that when caught they would make the mistake of being caught by a police officer. Then, as this was their first venture into crime, they would be more frightened of upsetting their so-called father and so gave a false address, only to be rumbled by the rather obvious name of Yanovsky, which in the seaside town of Margate in the 1960s was so rare that it was inevitable that a visit to their home would ensue. What was a very bad lesson was that when the police arrived to give them a warning, having previously retrieved the water pistols, Pavel was far more concerned about giving some sort of impression that he was a good father, and in front of the officer he handed over £1 for the boys to share. In his heart of hearts Anthony knew this was a flawed approach and for the first time, although relieved that the belt was not used, realized that this was a very bad lesson, that if caught stealing their father may even reward them. How could children, given this type of encouragement, be expected to follow the straight and narrow path of honesty? And so, stealing as a wrong would have to be learned the hard way, by being caught by the police countless times in the future as this vital lesson had not been learned. Anthony would have to use his own sense of right and wrong, hindered by Pavel's distorted views that sometimes led to Pavel defrauding Anthony of his savings earned by picking whelks from age 9, climbing chimney stacks at 10, clearing tables, peeling potatoes and chipping them, and washing dishes from the age of 12. Anthony never really knew that his abusive father was doing anything that was not for the benefit of his schizophrenic mother, and did not make the calculation that with the correct use of his time and resources Pavel could and should have engaged in washing dishes, of peeling potatoes or picking whelks. Anthony accepted that Pavel could not find work, however obvious it became that he squandered his time at the bookies of gambling halls or snooker tables. Pavel showed that all he was concerned about was making a life for Pavel, despite what would result for his family, and on top of this he seemed to actively be involved in scuppering Anthony's progress wherever that may manifest itself. When Anthony excelled in rounders, the idea of encouraging this sport pursuit did not enter Pavel's head, or when Anthony broke the school record at high jumping by being one of the few in Kent to master the new Frosby flop as opposed to the straddle. Pavel could have encouraged Anthony to pursue this sport which he loved, but Pavel was likely more aware of the black or red of a roulette table. Anthony knew that on any given Saturday Pavel could recall the results of any given horse race that day to any punter that wished to know a result, but had far less success naming the winner before the race. Chapter 26, Unraveling the Threads. The following is from the perspective of the sister of Anthony, who was used as a pawn so Pavel could get a day out of jail to attend her adoption hearing at the threat of if I don't get a day out for the hearing, I will oppose the adoption. So he attended with the prison officer by his side, and with his opposing wife by his side, she too handcuffed, by men in white overalls from the mental hospital in Charlton near Canterbury. He coldly said my daughter would be better off adopted out, and when his wife, the mother of Vanessa, was asked, she simply stated, I don't have babies to give them away. Chapter 27, Vanessa's Perspective. For as long as I could remember, the knowledge of having brothers who were not adopted out lingered in the depths of my consciousness, like faded photographs tucked away in an old album. It was a truth that whispered softly in the background of my life, occasionally surfacing in fleeting moments of introspection, or in conversations with family. But it wasn't until a serendipitous twist of fate that the quiet echoes of this truth burst forth into the forefront of my reality, altering the course of my life forever. It all began on an ordinary day, much like any other, when the universe decided to unveil its secrets in the most unexpected of ways. I was at home, going about my usual routine, when the new modem I had recently installed finally decided to cooperate. With a sigh of relief, I connected to the vast expanse of the internet, ready to lose myself in its endless possibilities. In a moment of idle curiosity, I decided to search for my original name, a harmless act fueled by the mere desire to see what information about me existed in the digital realm. Little did I know that this innocuous search would unearth a revelation so profound, it would shake the very foundation of her identity. As the search results populated the screen, my eyes scanned through the snippets of information, until they landed on a peculiar entry, a diary perhaps or a blog post, detailing the story of a sister separated by circumstance. My heart quickened as I read the words, each syllable resonating with a familiarity that I couldn't quite place. And then, like a bolt of lightning illuminating the darkness, the truth struck me with a force that left me breathless. The diary entry spoke of a sister lost to adoption, a sister whose existence had been shrouded in secrecy, but whose presence had always lingered in the periphery of the diarist's consciousness. It spoke of shared experiences, of a shared lineage traced back to a refugee from the gulags, and a mother ensnared by the labyrinth of schizophrenia. It spoke of a bond severed by fate, but never forgotten, a bond that transcended time and distance. In that moment, I felt a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me, shock, disbelief, but above all, an overwhelming sense of longing and belonging. For years, I had carried the weight of this unknown truth like a silent burden, but now, it lay exposed before me, raw and unfiltered. Yet as quickly as the revelation had come, it threatened to slip away, like grains of sand slipping through the cracks of my fingers. For when I attempted to search for the same information the following day, it was as if the digital breadcrumbs had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a hollow emptiness. But I refused to let this newfound truth elude me once more. Driven by an insatiable thirst for connection, I embarked on a quest to reclaim what had been lost, to find the brothers whose existence had been a mere whisper in the wind, but whose absence had left an indelible mark on my soul. And so, armed with nothing but determination and a glimmer of hope, I set out to seek them out, tracing the faint echoes of our shared past to the doorstep of my brother's house. And there, amidst the backdrop of 1,000 unanswered questions and a lifetime of untold stories, our paths converged once more, bound together by the invisible threads of fate. In the days that followed, we pieced together the fragments of our shared history, weaving a tapestry of memories that spanned continents and generations. We laughed, we cried, privately, we marveled at the intricacies of our intertwined destinies, each revelation bringing us closer to the truth of who we were and where we came from. And though the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the weight of our shared legacy loomed large, we faced it together, hand in hand, sisters reunited by the unbreakable bond of blood and kinship. For in the end, it was not the circumstances of our birth that defined us, but the strength of our shared love and the resilience of the human spirit that carried us through the darkest of times. Chapter 28, The Parking Debacle. This chapter deals with how petty the system can get when a powerful parking company chooses to chase people for fictitious breaches of their parking arrangements, and how it is allowed to burden innocent people with unnecessary bills that are difficult to pay for simply due to the threat of a civil action. As Anthony's van rolled into an unmarked parking area, he found himself unwittingly stepping into a legal quagmire. The absence of any conspicuous entry sign hinted at a bureaucratic maze lying in wait. Obligated to halt, the driver glanced over at the side where a parking conditions sign stood, a beacon of perplexity rather than clarity. In a bid to comply, the driver's next move would logically have to be a choice of applying for a permit online or seeking assistance via an automated phone call. Yet, both avenues were bound to lead to dead ends. The online system languishes in dysfunction, and the phone will only ring unanswered for hours, echoing futile attempts at any resolution. No accord to park had materialized, with no agreement inked. The van stood as a token of unwitting trespass, its owner Anthony being unknowingly left ensnared in an imminent legal web. UK Car Park Management Limited, an entity wielding more power and wealth than Anthony, swiftly pounced with a relentless fervor, chasing Anthony with demands down corridors of bureaucracy. Despite Anthony's previous attempt to lawfully transfer liability to the company who had control of the vehicle, the relentless pursuit persisted for over 2 years, as a sterile and circular task within the realm of administrative absurdity. Letters penned by Anthony, brimming with rationale and pleading, met a formidable adversary in the form of corporate might. It seemed a déjà vu of past injustices, reminiscent of the bias faced due to his foreign name, and apparent ignorance. The absurdity of the situation underscored the nightmarish nature of this bureaucratic overreach. The case lingered, a shadow over Anthony's daily existence. A civil claim loomed on the horizon, its outcome uncertain. A precedent Yanovsky v. DPP whispered of hope, suggesting that fundamental defects could unravel the claimant's case. Yet as the wheels of justice ground forward, the transfer of liability confirmed by the car park management firm languished in obscurity. A new parking charge notice bore the company's name, not Anthony's, a glaring oversight ignored by their relentless pursuit of profit. Yet they still pursued him with many template letters supposedly drawn up by legal representatives. For a judge to rule against Anthony, this would necessitate a dismissal of reason, a disregard for justice. The absence of an entry sign, devoid of a grace period, each a testament to the absurdity of the situation, and a valid transfer of any mistaken liability. Whatever the outcome, a record would endure within this publication bearing witness to a contest with bureaucratic implications. In the end, after hours of Anthony's wasted time, the firm simply ceased to chase the fine, showing that they were simply playing a numbers game, and raking in unwarranted charges from those not so tenacious as Anthony. Chapter 29, Traffic Light Chaos. So picture this. You're driving beside a large wall that is towering on your left-hand side, and just before the wall ends a sign appears in the road. According to the directions set out by pamphlets written by the Department of Transport, any traffic light should be next to the sign that says, "When red light shows, wait here," so that when you do pass the sign you in effect pass the traffic light at the same time. The traffic light is actually then situated 100 meters away, right in the middle of the roadworks and turns green while you wait at the sign. Then a forklift truck enters the roadworks in front of you, blocking your route. You enter the road behind the slowest forklift, and as you are moving slowly stuck behind it, the light turns red just before you pass it. But, because you waited at the sign before you entered the roadworks, you believe you are safe. You've been filmed by a set of covert police officers with a camera videoing the scene, and it has now captured your vehicle passing a red light, although if you had stopped in the middle of the works by the light, you would clearly have blocked the roadworks. As you drive past a farmyard entrance, a police officer beckons you into the farmyard area. He approaches you and tells you to go over to another police officer who informs you that you have breached a traffic light regulation, to which you say, "No, I haven't." Their response to this is that you were filmed, and you say, "No, I was not." Anthony, being Anthony, decided that he would fight this yet again, with another potential court case, aware that if there was a video, it certainly did not show him leaving the sign until the light was green. The court papers come through and Anthony requests the video, which arrives on a VHS tape. The Department of Transport pamphlets show the layout should have had the stop sign adjacent to the lights, which was not the case. The police officer draws out a plan of the setup that day that appears to comply with the pamphlet, but it is not the same as the layout that day with the light in the middle of the works. 2 videos are made, one of the incident where Anthony's car is seen passing the red light in the middle of the works, behind a forklift, and 2 a video of the layout driven through by the police. Anthony takes his own photos and prints them out. At the hearing, Anthony asks the officer repeatedly if the plan she drew is the same as the layout that day, to which she keeps on saying yes, and is certain. He does this until the clock interrupts and says she has answered yes. This is what Anthony was hoping for. It is now firmly embedded in the court's mind that the officer has stated that her sketch is an accurate depiction of the layout that day. Anthony then gets the video of the layout played out in court that clearly shows that the layout that day is completely different from the drawing that the officer insisted was the same, bearing in mind she was under oath too. It soon becomes clear to the court that Anthony completely complied with the sign that said "Wait here," but the video of the incident shows him passing the red light, and that the layout was non-compliant. So the unqualified lay magistrates go out for a mini-conference, and cannot come to a conclusion, so they re-enter the court, and ask the clerk if moving past the sign or the light is a definitive factor as to whether there is a breach. If the clerk said the sign, Anthony was then correct to leave the sign on green and pass the light whatever it was on. But if the clerk said the light, when the vehicle passed it, then Anthony was wrong to pass a red light. The politics was such that many motorists in the area had fallen for this trap, where the Keystone cops were waiting around the corner sniggering with a video camera with no camera signs to alert motorists, and Anthony was the first to object to what the police had set up to trap drivers. Another suspicious act on their part was to cease their weeks-long efforts, once Anthony had exposed their errors, and they had fined enough motorists. So the clerk says, without any research or a bat of an eye, it's the light that counts, as if he is an expert on traffic control. So the clerk is saying that the light placed in the middle of the works should have been observed, even though stopping in the middle of the works would have been absurd. So, Anthony was fined £300 including costs, and he immediately phoned the Department of Transport, who kindly confirmed, after reading the law on the matter, that in the absence of a thick white line across the road at the stoplight, then the temporary "Wait here" sign is where you need to wait, while the lights are red, and not drive past, and the light is not the place to stop. It became clear that the reason why the light was in the middle was because the cable was close to the generator, and to place the light in the correct location would have meant a longer cable, and a cable protector across the road. So laziness ruled the day and caused many motorists to be unnecessarily fined. By this time Anthony was so fed up with losing appeals, even the thought of challenging it further was becoming more traumatic than just paying the state £300 towards their next Keystone Cops escapade, so that they could set another trap for unsuspecting motorists. It's difficult not to conclude that the system is out to get you with little mercy, especially if you just roll over, and if Anthony had not challenged the traffic light trap, then it likely would have netted more fines against hundreds of further unsuspecting drivers by the Keystone Cops. The above scenario shows that the police actually do dream up various operations to catch drivers in revenue-raising stings. The above took place and Anthony kept the TS10 endorsement on his paper driving license, which was clean prior to this event. This was all because the clerk, who had had dealings with Anthony previously, wrongly said, "It's the light that counts," and would not even consider the blocking of the road by the forklift, or the incorrect layout of the lights and signs. It could even be the case that the forklift truck was purposely placed in the way of drivers attempting to pass the light on green, and the video was overwhelming. The first thing the police said on pulling Anthony over was, "We have it on video," yet they did not have a video of his vehicle passing the sign on green, because the camera was only set up to watch the light, not the sign. Chapter 30: How does the system work? Drawing from his experience of being arrested and detained on over 15 occasions, Anthony has documented a pattern of how the justice system operates in practice compared to its supposed purpose. This publication will now outline the way Anthony sees, from his experiences, how the system works. Then, we can delve into comparing that view to some real cases that appear to demonstrate that this is exactly how the system operates, with the ultimate outcome of not seeking justice, but simply avoiding inconvenience for the courts, the police, legal system, judiciary, and further avoiding the ultimate pitfall of judicial embarrassment, which this publication aims to show is ultimately inevitable. The justice system. When someone of little means financially, socially, or mentally turns up in court, the system will take advantage of their overriding feelings associated with insecurity and a largely self-imposed feeling of guilt. It will use those emotions to extract as much as possible from a person, and if possible, sentence them to the harshest sentence, whether there is an indication that in reality, they are likely not guilty of the offense charged. If someone turns up who is wise to the system, this mechanism doesn't work well for the court system. So, we have a two-tier system of those who can game the system, and those who can't. Those who fall into the category of ones who cannot game the system are often made up of the unfortunate ones in life, whether that be due to mental issues, or the lack of ability to play the system, because they may be too open and honest for their own good, which the system as it is, takes full advantage of. Those who can play the system come into two subcategories: the experienced hardened criminals, who have a lifestyle of criminal activity, and those who have the means to throw an obscene amount of money at very professional defense teams. Add to this the fact that the unfortunates are often used to create case law that helps the judicial system to manipulate statutes, especially if the judiciary is not keen on the way these statutes may limit their understanding of what Parliament intended. The powers that the judiciary may have are to find people guilty and powers of sentencing. The above can be illustrated by looking at some case law that, on the surface, would seem like a very technical legal analysis, but in reality, can show how the House of Lords and the Court of Appeal will subtly manipulate the result to create case law that favors their own subjective opinion, and in some instances, can backfire on itself. When this happens, the judiciary can feel a sense of judicial embarrassment, but the public or offenders or suspects often experience the brunt of these traditional mistakes, either by being charged with more serious offenses, or receiving a harsher sentence. Take the concept of murder. Friends and relatives of a person killed are far more inclined towards the heaviest sanction, and the authorities may want to charge a suspect with murder, so the accused feel intimidated into pleading guilty at least to manslaughter, which carries a more lenient punishment. This would be convenient. But the authorities must not charge someone with murder if the facts show the death or serious injury was unintentional. An example of this is where a single punch leads to a death. In this instance, a murder charge is likely not an option. This changed with the House of Lords decision regarding a situation where Mr. Cunningham struck a man with a chair, who initially walked away after the incident, and was checked over at the hospital, and discharged himself with no evidence of any fracture on his skull. At a later date, the victim was hospitalized and went into a coma and eventually died. Tensions were high and Mr. Cunningham's brother had his door blasted with a shotgun. Mr. Cunningham was arrested for unlawful wounding and charged with murder after he had admitted that his actions were not intended to kill, but he had shown they were clearly likely to cause grievous bodily harm. As the law stood, the Homicide Act of 1957 did not define murder, other than with an intent to kill, and without this intent, it would be manslaughter, and sentencing would depend on the severity of the actions of the defendant. At the trial, it was not found that there was any intent to kill, but the judge directed that if the jury concluded that there was an intent to cause serious bodily injury before the attack, then he was guilty of murder. Mr. Cunningham had admitted an intent to cause an element of harm by way of his actions, and the jury came back with a question as to the difference between serious harm and grievous bodily harm. It was not explained that at the time, grievous bodily harm could be a broken bone, and an intent to cause more harm than this was required for a conviction of murder. Otherwise, breaking someone's arm with intent to do just that and no more harm would be murder if they died due to a complication caused by the attack. Whereas it was accepted that an intent to cause serious bodily harm whilst being reckless as to whether they died was the minimum needed intent for it to be murder. This would be more in line with the requirement of an intent to kill. That was the needed motivation required for attempted murder. If a person could be charged with attempted murder after a threat to break an arm, this may seem an absurdity. But an attempt to cause life-threatening injuries could be seen as an attempt to commit murder. Cunningham became a convenient test case to change the charging standard, and if it felt convenient, any jury could be persuaded to convict someone for murder if they simply intended to break a bone. This was never the intention of the Homicide Act 1957 or Parliament, but the judiciary had effected a convenient substantial change in the meaning of a statute. As it happened, Mr. Cunningham served 8 years before being released on parole, which raises further questions as to the gravity of his conviction. Why was he released after just 8 years? Was it because it was clear that he is not a murderer, and went overboard in a drunken rage over the girl he intended to marry being shown off in the arms of someone he thought was mocking him, and who was later beaten by another assailant? Whatever the reason for his short 8-year spell, R.V. Cunningham would have a more lingering effect on the future of the charging standard for prosecutors who more recently charged a guy for murder after he punched his best friend in a drunken rage, and his friend fell on furniture and supposedly broke ribs, leading to an unknown hemorrhage and his death a week later. He was relieved to be able to plead to manslaughter after 14 months remanded in custody, when it was likely an unfortunate accidental death, especially as the victim had refused hospital treatment, and no one could have foreseen that a single punch could have such a devastating outcome. He should never have been charged with murder simply to scare him into admitting manslaughter, but this is the legacy of R.V. Cunningham, and he was one of the unfortunates who did not even think of playing the system, and neither could he afford expensive lawyers, so his fate was sealed the moment he punched his friend. There clearly needs to be a difference between unintentional consequences and the result of what is a clear case of murdering someone. Intent is the key, and it is often assumed, manipulated, or ignored in favor of an outcome that is less embarrassing or more convenient to the judiciary. Chapter 31. Another case of an unfortunate. According to the news, Herbert Coates, 35, knocked down Christopher Norris at a Margate flat after the two fell out on the anniversary of his brother's death. The report goes on further to say, after being hit with the punch, 47-year-old Mr. Norris fell, striking his head against a door, and then toppling into an amplifier. Here it is clearly mentioned that the victim banged his head onto a door, then an amplifier. The news article went on to say, a paramedic was called to the home in Dane Road, Cliftonville, but Mr. Norris, unaware he had suffered massive internal bleeding, refused to go to the hospital for further treatment. Take note, if Mr. Norris had suffered a single broken rib, it is a fact that a hallmark of a rib fracture is that a deep breath makes the pain worse. Pain from a single fractured rib can even impede your breathing, leading to a chest infection. So the initial paramedics should have noticed and made a note, which they did not. And when he died, he had multiple broken ribs. 4 days later, on July 28, he was discovered dead by other health professionals, not on the street where he lived, but in a person's house, because don't forget, he was homeless, and supposedly, after not complaining for 4 whole days of the pain associated with cracked ribs, he was found at the same address where he had been punched. Where had he also been for those 4 days? Are we assuming that he stayed inside Alan Fair's home for 4 days, after only having been invited there to take drugs on Friday 24th July? What was his benefits day to collect his benefits check? And was it collected on Monday 27th or Tuesday 28th July? Or was his money accessed on Saturday or Sunday via a card machine or used in a shop? Ask yourself what happens in the life of a homeless person over a 4-day period. Does he sit in a stranger's house for 4 days if he is homeless? Probably not, being a resident of Dane Road, but he was found dead in Dane Road, and there are other questions that need an answer. Kent police were called at 7:10 p.m. on Tuesday, July 28, where 47-year-old Christopher Norris had been pronounced deceased by the South East Coast Ambulance Service at the home of another person. So who called the ambulance? And was there any delay? This smacks of lazy policing. Following a post-mortem examination, which would have shown a healing black eye and multiple recent broken ribs, on Friday, July 31, 2020, detectives from the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate began a murder investigation. A man was then arrested on suspicion of murder. You can see what's happened here, can't you? A homeless guy is found dead, in a house not his own, and he's got a black eye. What does that look like? Looks like murder. On Sunday, August 2nd, the Crown Prosecution Service authorized a charge of murder against 34-year-old Herbert Coates from Athelstan Road, Cliftonville, who had not seen Christopher for 4 days. He appeared before Medway magistrates August 3, 2020, where he was remanded in custody to appear at Maidstone Crown Court on Wednesday, August 5, 2020. This murder charge should have complied with the charging standard for murder, which is causing the death of a person with the intent to cause GBH, R.V. Cunningham 1982 Hull. Anthony Cunningham of Margate. After Herbert had spent almost 15 months remanded in custody, he caved in and finally indicated that he would plead guilty to manslaughter, although the CPS had until then insisted on murder, based on the evidence and R.V. Cunningham. Prosecutor Philip Billets QC told Maidstone Crown Court that after consideration by senior lawyers of the medical evidence, showing multiple broken ribs rather than an additional head injury, the plea to manslaughter would be acceptable. Realistically, if there was a connection between the assault that was admitted and the multiple cracked ribs, then the assault would have had to be a sustained kicking, and not a single push onto furniture. Mr. Norris is believed to have died after receiving a punch, before falling onto a door and then an amplifier. Coates would be sentenced on Monday, October 18, 2021, and was further remanded into custody. His barrister Herbert Higgs QC, Mr. Billets and senior CPS lawyers were in discussions for the past few days, before a plea to the lesser offence was offered, which does not indicate the reality of the matter, in that they were likely in discussions for the whole of the 14 months that John Boy had been in jail. Coates appeared at Maidstone Crown Court. Mr. Billets revealed that the victim had refused treatment after the attack, likely because he was a homeless man, had no cracked ribs on that occasion, and didn't want to go to the hospital and be off the streets in the summer of 2020, and experts believed there would have been a 98% chance of survival had he sought medical help, although hemorrhages from the spleen can cause death in 6 hours. Upon reflection, it doesn't make sense that somebody would refuse treatment while in great pain and having difficulty breathing after multiple fractured ribs, but it does make sense that he may have refused treatment after a single punch to the eye. He added that Mr. Norris' injuries were consistent with his head coming into contact with a linear surface, such as a door or amplifier. Note, additional to the black eye, a head injury and not broken ribs, the medical cause of death, were discovered, but evidence does not really seem to matter after a guilty plea has been accepted, does it? At Maidstone Crown Court, October 13, 2021, the count of manslaughter was put to him and Coates formally admitted a charge of manslaughter in relation to the incident, and would be sentenced on Monday, October 18, 2021. The prosecution had accepted his not guilty plea to murder. So, he had admitted manslaughter at Maidstone Crown Court, and was jailed for 5 years. The court heard how before Mr. Norris' body was discovered, Coates had telephoned him and apologised. The news did not state here that the call was not just before the body was found 4 days after the punch, but 15 minutes later and 4 days prior to Christopher's death. Realistically, we don't really think that Mr. Norris would answer the phone with multiple cracked ribs, and if he did, whose phone was it? Because we're guessing a homeless man doesn't have a mobile phone and a charger, because he doesn't have anywhere to plug it in. Or if John phoned, he wouldn't have been able to have a decent conversation with Christopher, able to accept the apology. So either John is lying, and he didn't apologise, or he did apologise, and Mr. Norris was actually quite well at the time of the apology, apart from his black eye, and may have received multiple cracked ribs sometime within the 4-day period between the 24th and the 28th of July 2020. None of this was wicked up on. John's barrister Herbert Hoggs QC told Maidstone Crown Court that it had been a classic one-punch manslaughter, and the first time in his life that Coates had been violent. This was apparently now clearer to the prosecution, although possibly inaccurate, and there was no basis for a murder charge, or for an indictment for murder, given the lack of evidence. This is a tragic case when one punch has resulted in death, and an unusual case where the defendant has wronged the victim and apologised, he said. So you now have his defense lawyer rolling over and completely accepting that the punch, supposedly leading to his death by resulting in multiple rib fractures, which doesn't make sense. But if Mr. Norris was able to answer the phone and breathe normally and while being medically examined, then he was probably not in as much pain as you would be if you had received multiple cracked ribs. Also bear in mind that in the UK defense and prosecution lawyers and the sitting judge use the same changing room called advocates' robing, and likely discuss the hearing less openly. One of many most pressing questions is this: why had he been in somebody else's home for a 4-day period, and getting progressively more poorly and the homeowner not even noticing? Or if Christopher had been out, walking the streets like homeless people do, and returned to Dane Road at some point before 28th July, where had he been? Prosecutor Philip Beans QC told how an expert in serious trauma cases said Mr. Norris would have had a 98.67% chance of surviving his injuries had he attended hospital, so it seems the punch may not have been the cause of death. Harry's case serves as a sobering reminder of the systemic inequalities within the justice system, and the urgent need for reform to ensure fairness and accountability for all individuals, regardless of their socio-economic status. As Anthony reflects on his own experiences and encounters with the legal system, he underscores the importance of challenging systemic injustices and advocating for meaningful change to protect the rights and dignity of all individuals. In the face of adversity, Anthony remains resolute in his commitment to exposing the flaws within the system and empowering others to demand justice and equality. Chapter 32, Lessons Learned. What is the point of the above? It is this: Jonathan found himself disclosed with no evidence before, during or after his arrest on suspicion of murder, and even though this evidence was lacking, he spent 14 months in jail even before his trial. Does this fit with the fairness espoused by the judicial process? Is it possible that he only pleaded guilty because he had spent so long behind bars charged with murder, when the homeless victim died 4 days later from complications resulting from multiple broken ribs at an address that he had been invited to after a single punch in the face? The victim was only supposed to be there to collect drugs, and either remain there for 4 days, or return to die there. The point of this episode is to show that the unfortunate ones often don't get justice, because they are treated unfairly and based on case law fabricated by the judiciary. If we were to look at the 900 cases of the sub-postmasters who mainly pleaded guilty, could it have been the case that they were just unfortunate ones who had a massive machine against them? Another question comes to mind. Why did the court system not notice that as the 900 cases of fraud came before the courts, dealing with persons who had impeccable backgrounds, there had to be something wrong with the system? No one came forward, and the excuse of the Lady Chief Justice is that 90% pleaded guilty and the court's hands were tied, and yet it took a civil case supported by a multi-million-pound insurance company to show that the post office had been, and are still hiding evidence. So make this equation if you would. If Mr. Bates and the 555 claimants had not received the funding to win such an obvious claim, would we even know today? And would ITV have been able to expose the fraud of the post office executives and lawyers? Answer has to be no. So the system still favors those with resources, and it seems no coincidence that it is not paying out compensation to the sub-postmasters, as they have not got a multi-million-pound company supporting their pursuit since they won their case. But the post office has an unlimited supply of funds. Is that a coincidence? Probably not. All the time people think that the justice system is fair and unbiased, then when they come into contact with it, they will simply roll over and pay fines they don't owe to parking companies and enforcement companies, get arrested for offences without evidence, spend time in police cells, and plead guilty for the convenience of the justice system, or to save the embarrassment of the judiciary. If you met Anthony and saw the court files, judgments, care order, criminal record, social services report, Attorney General's order against him making claims or applications to any court in the land, and his record of unnecessary arrests, you may just realize that the judiciary does not have your best interests at heart, but only those with resources. If an ex-foster child has a verifiable list of being disproportionately hounded by carers, teachers, legal entities, local authorities, police, and the judiciary, and he chooses to educate himself, he can then disclose the above, and warn those who may inadvertently trust in a form of gaslighting that takes place, saying you must be guilty, we are the authorities, and we would not arrest you unless you are guilty, and being told this diatribe over and over again, The effect is no different from a wife or abused child, who is being shouted at constantly into believing that they are worth far less than nothing. But it has not worked with the so-called child of Stalin, and does not need to work against anyone. Access to justice as an idealistic view is shouted from the rooftops, but if you don't cross the palms of a lawyer with your hard-earned resources, you will stand out and be ostracized as being ignorant, however powerful your arguments are, and although the system is styled as adversarial, judges can be only too quick to assist the other side who has a professional team that may be struggling to respond. Chapter 33, The Financial Challenge. From Anthony's experience, he has concluded that the legal profession is one that holds immense responsibility, ethical standards, and trust. Solicitors in the UK are expected to uphold these principles while representing their clients diligently and ethically. However, there have been concerns and criticisms regarding the practice of some solicitors, who employ unqualified law students to act as police station representatives and handle caseloads beyond their capabilities. This practice is often seen as underhanded, aimed at maximizing revenue through cost-effective guilty pleas, while avoiding more time-consuming cases where suspects plead not guilty. One of the primary issues with employing unqualified law students as police station representatives is the lack of proper training and experience. While these individuals may have theoretical knowledge from their legal studies, they lack the practical experience and nuanced understanding of criminal law and procedure that qualified solicitors possess. Handling sensitive police station interviews and advising clients during such critical moments requires a high level of expertise and legal acumen, which unqualified individuals may not fully possess. Furthermore, managing caseloads beyond their capabilities not only jeopardizes the quality of legal representation, but also raises ethical concerns. Legal professionals have a duty to provide competent representation to their clients, and overburdening unqualified individuals with excessive caseloads undermines this fundamental principle. It increases the risk of errors, inadequate preparation, and ultimately compromises the rights of the accused. The motivation behind such practices often boils down to financial considerations. By employing unqualified individuals at lower costs and maximizing guilty plea cases, solicitors may seek to increase their revenue and profitability. Guilty pleas are generally resolved more quickly and require less time and resources, compared to cases where suspects plead not guilty and proceed to trial. This approach may prioritize financial gains over the quality of legal representation and the pursuit of justice. Moreover, the pressure on unqualified representatives to manage high caseloads may lead to shortcuts and unethical practices. This could include coercing clients into guilty pleas without fully exploring legal options or adequately advising them of their rights. Such practices not only harm the interests of the accused, but also erode public trust in the legal profession and the justice system as a whole. Another concerning aspect is the impact on the education and professional development of law students involved in these practices. While practical experience is valuable, it should be obtained through proper internships, supervised training programs, and mentorship under qualified legal professionals. Employing law students as substitutes for qualified solicitors in crucial legal matters undermines their educational journey and exposes them to ethical dilemmas and potential legal liabilities. To address these issues, regulatory bodies, legal associations and law firms must prioritize ethical standards, professional integrity, and the quality of legal representation. Adequate training, supervision and mentorship programs should be in place for legal professionals at all stages of their careers, including law students gaining practical experience. Transparency in billing practices and client communication is also essential to ensure that legal services are provided with integrity and in the best interests of justice. In conclusion, the underhanded practice of employing unqualified law students as police station representatives to manage excessive caseloads for financial gains raises serious ethical and legal concerns. It compromises the quality of legal representation, undermines justice, and erodes public trust in the legal profession. Upholding ethical standards, prioritizing professional development, and ensuring competent legal representation are paramount to maintaining the integrity of the legal system. The above abuse of the system by claiming the full amount under legal aid certificates, which entitle defendants to a fully paid qualified solicitor, but are only getting access, in some instances, to just an admin clock with little or no qualifications. The defendant often is unaware that they're being babysat by someone who is not a solicitor. One type of application that could often and should clearly be made to halt proceedings is a no case to answer application. This, however, would reduce the gains that a law firm can make for a guilty plea. Submitting a no case to answer application in a criminal prosecution typically involves arguing that there is insufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Here are the general steps that can be followed. A lawyer needs to understand the legal basis, which means they need to research and understand the legal basis for a no case to answer application in the relevant jurisdiction. They may need to consult with a more expensive lawyer, as this type of application requires legal expertise. Once they have consulted with a criminal defense lawyer who is experienced in handling such applications, they can then assess the case, gather evidence, and prepare the application. All this has a cost and eats into the profit margins, and it is easier to get the suspect to plead guilty to a lesser charge for convenience. An application may include witness statements, documents, or any other evidence that weakens the prosecution's case. Even in the clearest of cases, they would still need to draft the formal application based on legal grounds and the evidence gathered. The application would need to clearly outline why there is no case to answer, citing legal precedents and relevant statutes. The application would then need to be filed, and the lawyer would file the application with the appropriate court or legal authority, according to the procedural rules, and ensure that all necessary documentation is included and filed within the required time frame. They would have to attend the hearing after filing, as there will likely be a hearing where the lawyer presents arguments supporting the application. The prosecution may also present their arguments against the application. In some instances, suspects go to jail, mount an appeal unrepresented by any lawyer, and expose glaring mistakes in the prosecution, or a witness attends who could have been called, and this could have been avoided with a simple application at the outset of the proceedings, at the first magistrate's hearing, for an order that there was no case to answer based on the evidence. In fact, there are so few of these applications made that it begs the question as to whether there is some sort of unspoken agreement between prosecution and defense lawyers that none of these applications be made. The result is that more guilty pleas to a lesser offense are submitted and accepted, and the defense lawyers walk away with their legal aid fee for just pleading mitigation in a 15-minute hearing, one after the other, and even using unqualified students to attend the formalities so they can maximize their returns. A recent Court of Appeals judgment considered the use of these assistants in place of solicitors, and paved the way for a blank check if legally aided law firms wish to supplant a fully qualified lawyer on hundreds of pounds per hour, with an admin clock on £20 per hour, and then not even attending the full week of a Crown Court trial, where the defendant faces a possible life sentence. This is now an unchallenged decision of the Court of Criminal Appeals, and can be considered as case law in defense of placing an admin clock into a situation where he or she can assist counsel in the case against their firm's client. This is a win-win for law firms, but a lose-lose for defendants, who should have been awarded a legal aid certificate for a litigator and a QC barrister, but only end with junior counsel and an admin clerk. And is it any wonder that the defendant in question got 13 years for a duplicitous count that he had pleaded guilty for a lesser offence to? The above is documented and remains part of current case law for anyone to check. To be continued. A further edition will explore Anthony's exploits as he carefully avoids the trap of drug addiction, overcomes the tendency to drink too much, switches jobs to take on courses in motor mechanics, sues a large retail chain, wins, only to have the judgment wrongfully overturned, sues the police for assaulting his father, exposing their complicity, struggles to protect his mother despite his father's aggression, curtailing the negative effect of his father's addiction to gambling, receives judicial sanctions placed on him by the Attorney General halting his ability to litigate, creates bad case law before the President of the Queen's Bench Division, notes that the same bad case law mysteriously disappears from public archives, takes on a private criminal prosecution sanctioned by the Chief Magistrate of England Lady Penelope and C.B. Hewitt, experiences the local Margate magistrates dismissing the same matter without even a hearing, and other exploits that expose the justice system's flaws. The concept of the child of Stalin disposition exists in many ways, in that if an individual can be falsely associated with a negative historical entity, then there becomes a direct correlation between this stigma and how far the authorities and the judicial system can go to hound these individuals into submission. Yet the same individuals use the judicial process to attempt to right the wrongs. He or she can create a lasting record of matters that, if read directly from the court records, leave the judicial process as openly exposed for all to read. The above matters did happen, and there is a court record, paper and microfiche trail of judgments, social services records, war records and newspaper clippings to substantiate the history of this child of Stalin and other unfortunates caught up in a gaslighting machine called the justice system. Reference material. Anthony Yanofsky attempted to bring numerous complaints before the courts, summarized as follows. Complaints attempted by Mr. Yanofsky. 1. Civil proceedings. 6 separate High Court actions including allegations of negligence against individuals and organizations concerning his stepdaughter's alleged abduction. Claims against the Kent police for failing to prosecute individuals for the alleged abduction. Libel, defamation, slander, fraud, and negligence claims against various parties, including religious organizations, police officers, and individuals. Damages claims totaling hundreds of millions of pounds. 2. Criminal proceedings. Attempted private criminal prosecutions against multiple individuals including accusations under the Sexual Offences Act 1956 against Ellen J. V.E. Allegations of sexual offences involving his own son and stepdaughter. Additional allegations against various other individuals. 3. Threats of further litigation. Threatened civil and criminal actions against multiple parties, including legal representatives, police, and organizations involved with his stepdaughter. Determinations by the court. 1. Vexatious civil proceedings. All 6 High Court actions were determined to be vexatious and without reasonable cause. These actions included incoherent or baseless claims, abusive correspondence, and improper attempts to obtain judgments. Specific claims were struck out or dismissed, often with costs awarded against Mr. Yanofsky. 2. Vexatious criminal proceedings. The court reviewed multiple failed attempts to initiate private criminal prosecutions and determined these to be without foundation. Allegations made were deemed unsupported by adequate evidence. 3. General conduct. The court considered Mr. Yanofsky's overall history of litigation, including abusive letters, threats to legal representatives, and the refusal to comply with cost orders. His actions demonstrated a pattern of using litigation as a tool for harassment rather than legitimate redress. Final determination. The court ruled that Mr. Yanofsky had habitually, persistently, and without reasonable cause instituted vexatious proceedings. Consequently, an all proceedings order under Section 42 of the Supreme Court Act 1981 was made, requiring Mr. Yanofsky to obtain the High Court's leave before initiating any future legal actions. Results. None of Mr. Yanofsky's actions were considered on their merits. The court found his claims and applications to be vexatious, incoherent, and without reasonable cause. In particular, 1. Civil actions. All 6 High Court actions were struck out or dismissed as disclosing no reasonable cause of action. The court found the claims to be frivolous, scandalous, or vexatious without any substantive merit being considered. For example, in Action 1, involving negligence claims against Mr. LVE and others, the pleadings were incoherent and plainly vexatious. In Action 5, a £300 million claim against a society, the pleadings were struck out as frivolous and scandalous. 2. Criminal proceedings. The private criminal prosecutions Mr. Yanofsky's attempts to bring were refused by magistrates because there was insufficient evidence to justify the issuing process. His allegations were considered baseless and did not warrant further consideration. 3. Patterns of behavior. The court reviewed Mr. Yanofsky's conduct as a whole, including threats, abusive correspondence, and repeated non-compliance with cost orders. His litigious activity was deemed an abusive process aimed at harassment rather than legitimate legal resolution. The court focused on his habitual and persistent abuse of the legal system, rather than addressing the specific merits of individual claims. Summary argument: potential miscarriages of justice due to lack of merits-based consideration. It is a fundamental principle of justice that every litigant is entitled to have their claims or defenses considered on their merits. In the case of Mr. Yanofsky, none of his actions, whether civil or criminal, were assessed substantively. Instead, the court summarily struck out or dismissed his claims as vexatious, incoherent, or frivolous. While the court rightly considered his pattern of behavior and abusive litigation tactics, the absence of any merits-based evaluation raises the possibility that one or more of his claims could have been legitimate and worthy of judicial scrutiny. The sheer volume of claims, combined with their consistent dismissal without a substantive hearing, creates at least a potential for multiple miscarriages of justice. For example, allegations against police and individuals regarding his stepdaughter. Mr. Yanofsky repeatedly sought redress regarding the alleged abduction of his stepdaughter, a matter of significant emotional and personal gravity. The complete dismissal of these claims without evaluating the facts may have overlooked a genuine grievance. Private prosecutions, his attempts to initiate criminal proceedings, were dismissed without fully exploring the adequacy of evidence he sought to rely upon, including potentially serious allegations under the Sexual Offences Act, 1956. Systemic disregard. By treating the entirety of his litigation history as vexatious, the court risked failing to differentiate between abusive conduct and potentially valid claims hidden within his broader pattern of behavior. The failure to consider any of Mr. Yanofsky's claims on their merits means the possibility of legitimate grievances being dismissed without due process cannot be ruled out. While vexatious behavior should be curtailed, the integrity of the justice system demands that even litigants who act abusively retain the right to a fair hearing on substantive issues. Without such consideration, the courts risk perpetrating injustices under the guise of efficiency or procedural expediency. Further incident of unlawful/mistaken arrest of Anthony. Extract from arrest. In relation to crime report number 46/115922/22. For police officers. Anthony Yanofsky. On 7th of September 2022. At Anthony's Ramsgate home. Hello, is it Anthony? Anthony, yeah. Margate Police Station. Is it okay to pop in? Anthony, what for? We need to have a chat with you. Anthony, what about? I'll have a chat inside. Is your wife about? Anthony, not yet. Is your wife about? We need to have a chat about something. Can we come in please, Anthony? Anthony, not yet, no. Okay, Anthony, time is 5 to 8. I'm arresting you on suspicion of producing articles for the use in fraud. You do not need to say anything, but it might harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something that you'd like to rely on in court. Anthony, can I get grounds for this? The necessity for the arrest is to preserve evidence by way of questioning. Okay. Anthony, I need some grounds. 1 second. You'll be provided that at custody. We've got to arrange that. I need to get you dressed and we'll get that sorted out at custody. Anthony, fine. I'm going to need some grounds. You'll be provided the full circumstances at custody. Anthony, using articles. Yep. Using items for you to put in the use of fraud. Anthony, really? Yep. Anthony, so. We will discuss it in the interview. Not now, Anthony. We need to get you ready and get you down to custody, okay? Anthony, well, I need some grounds. You don't need grounds. We'll explain it in front of the custody sergeants. We've given you the grounds. We have given you the grounds. That's all you need to have for now. Anthony, you haven't. Yeah. So, do you want to come and get some clothes on? Anthony, you haven't given me any grounds. Anthony, we're wasting time. We need to get you ready. We need to get you down to custody, and then we can explain everything, okay? Anthony, okay. Let's get you sorted. Anthony, right, I want you to provide grounds. Anthony. Anthony, based on pace 24, pace 28. Anthony. Anthony, so I need grounds. We have provided you the grounds. Come on, let's get ready, Anthony, please. We have provided you grounds for your arrest. Lady Officer Ben has explained your grounds. Anthony, right. He explained the reason for the arrest. I've given you the. Anthony, they are not the grounds. I've given you the grounds for arrest, which is the allegation of producing articles for use in fraud, okay? The full circumstances can be provided to you at custody, but we can't do that right now. Anthony. Anthony, you are going to come in looking for clothes. I need to come with you because you've been arrested, right? Let's not make it hard. We're gonna make it easy, okay? Anthony, you're making it difficult because you're not giving me grounds for the arrest. Come on, Anthony, please. We have given you the grounds, Anthony. Please. Anthony, you're going to have to give me the grounds. You got your grounds, Anthony. Is there anyone else in the house with you? Anthony, no. Do you understand what grounds are? Oh, and Anthony, can you get ready, please? Anthony, don't touch me. Can you get ready, please? Anthony, yes, I'm getting ready. You're making it far more difficult than it is. Can you get ready, please? Thank you. We're being polite. You just need to get some clothes on and we'll get you down to custody. We will explain everything when we're in custody. Your wife not around? Anthony, no. Is she arrested as well? I was wondering. I was expecting your wife to be here as well. Anthony, is she under arrest as well? I'm asking where your wife might be. Are you in the house on your own, Anthony? Anthony, yes. Reasonable grounds. Wait, Anthony, no. Anthony, listen for a second. We're going to explain when we get to custody. Anthony, you're interrupting me. Because you keep saying grounds. We've explained the grounds. You need to get clothes on so we can get you in custody. You're delaying. Anthony, can I just tell you what I understand? All right. Anthony, I'm not going to disclose any piece under cow. Am I even under caution? You are under caution, of course. Anthony, I'm under caution. Yes, you were under caution. I cautioned you when I arrested you. Anthony, what did you say? I said, you're under arrest on suspicion of producing articles for use in fraud. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something you later rely on in court. Anthony, I can't defend something I haven't got the grounds for. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. If you want a solicitor, you may be given in disclosure. You can have a chat. Anthony, you mean if I want to? Free legal representation. Anthony, when you say legal, do you mean Tuckers? If you want Tuckers, you can have Tuckers. Anthony, is there another one? There is a multitude of different legal representative services. But if you want Tuckers, you can talk to the custody sergeant. They can arrange that. Anthony, I want to understand about that reasonable grounds for suspicion. That's what I want to understand. That is why you're arrested. That's why we're here this morning. Anthony, give me reasonable grounds. We've given you the grounds for arrest and necessity, and that is all you need to know at this stage. Yeah. That is enough, an arrest. You're under arrest on suspicion, okay? Not belief, suspicion. Anthony, I can't understand what suspicion is based on. That'll be explained during the interview. Anthony, right. That's the point of the interview. Anthony, right. And this is fraud. Fraud, yeah. Anthony, really? Anthony, so, I supposedly defrauded someone something. It will be explained. I'm not gonna do the interview here. You're going to be interviewed down at the station because then it's fair. Anthony, it's a Wednesday, isn't it? I don't know anything about you, Anthony. Anthony, you don't know. Do you know my name? Do you know my date of birth? Do I know your date of birth? Anthony, yeah. I just know your name. Anthony. Yanofsky. Anthony, are you alright? I'll watch you get dressed now next time. Oh, what's the matter with you, watching me get dressed? Lady officer, I'm not watching you get dressed, you are already dressed. Anthony, well, what are you doing watching me getting dressed? Anthony. Anthony. Anthony, come on. Getting ready. Anthony, listen, would you consider this as a question? No. Everyone that gets arrested. Anthony, but is this aggression? Everyone that gets arrested. Anthony, I know I have, is this aggression? It could be classed as that a little bit. Anthony, really? Yeah. You've got a little bit of an attitude when we're just. Anthony, oh, got an attitude. When we're just speaking to you. Anthony, alright, how many times you've had people watching you get dressed? I haven't been arrested. Anthony, all day long. I haven't been arrested, so I don't know. Anthony, it is part of the course. Oh dear. I don't even know what I'm arrested for. I'm telling, I do not know what I'm arrested for. We just explained it. Anthony, you haven't explained it, you're. Anthony, come on please. What do you need? Anthony, shirts. You are under arrest. You can have your coat when you're in custody. Anthony, can I phone my wife? Based on what you said. Anthony, so I cannot phone my wife and tell her. And I said no. Lady officer, he can make a phone call in custody. Just tell him, he can make a phone call in custody. Yeah. Anthony, you can make a phone call in custody, that's the state of play. Anthony, right. My jacket. The jacket is on the bed there. Have you got custody number, Dan? Oh hi Sarg, one adult male in custody. My phone didn't say custody number. You have to give them a heads up that we're en route with one. Yeah, no concern for those. Okay, cheers. Medication. What version is it? I have no idea. Anthony, you wouldn't know. I'm not religious. Anthony, you know that it's a Bible though. It is a Bible. Anthony, listen, I'm a little bit shocked. Have you ever arrested anyone who absolutely had no idea they were going to be arrested? Yeah, and that's the whole reason. Yeah, many times. Anthony, you've got many times arrested people that are under shock and don't know what it's about. And many times, once they get interviewed, they fully know the circumstances. So it is a process, yeah. Anthony, honestly, make it hard for me. Is there door keys? Anthony, do you want the door keys? Yes. Give it to my colleague, Anthony, please, the door key. Anthony, you can have the door keys, then lock up the door, making sure. Yeah. Anthony, all right. When you walk out the door, make yourself. We are going to go this way, Anthony. Anthony, will you search my house? Yes, on section 32. Anthony, section 32. Yes. Search after arrest. Anthony, what about section 17? No, section 17 is entry. We are not kicking the door in. We search after arrest, which is section 32. Anthony, can I just say my wife's not got a fantastic heart condition. It is not a ploy of some sort. I would like her to know that the police are at my house, and you can make the phone call yourself. Lady officer, have you got your wife's number? Anthony, can you just tell me from my side, if she is going to be arrested? I'll tell you, I need to know that because she has got a heart condition. Okay, and all those conversations we can have with her. Anthony, if you just say no, it doesn't involve her. It is not relevant at the moment, is it? We need to get you into custody. Come on, let's go. Have you got your wife's number? Lady officer, we can give her a call and let her know. Anthony, yes, 07. One sec. Anthony, I would like to know that she has nothing to do with this. I mean, you can't even tell me that. Lady officer, not at the moment, until you have been interviewed. Anthony, is she going to be arrested? It's not relevant at the moment, Anthony. The main thing is to get you booked and get you questioned, and we will deal with it. Lady officer, what was that number? Anthony, 07. Lady officer, yeah. Anthony. Lady officer, yeah. Anthony, 601. Lady officer, yeah. Anthony, 127. Lady Officer, where is your wife at the moment? Anthony, she was dropping the kids off. I don't know where she is. She will come home any minute. Right, shall we go then? Anthony, be gentle with her. Yeah, we will. Lady Officer, we will. After this unlawful intrusion into Anthony's home, this matter was dropped after 13 hours in a police cell, 2 interviews under caution, and a further 8 months of interference with Anthony's day-to-day life, until the police decided there was no case to answer after failing to show Anthony an evidence that required an arrest. The following is a previous matter that had created bad case law in 1998. In 1997, Anthony appeared in court on a charge respecting a matter that one differed from the ticket he received, and also the location. The magistrates amended the summons on the day of the trial, and refused an adjournment contrary to MCA S. 123/1981. Anthony appealed to the High Court and the following took place. The judgment by Mr. Justice Sully and Anthony Yanofsky v. Department of Public Prosecutions effectively circumvented Section 123(2) of the Magistrates' Court Act 1980 by interpreting its requirements narrowly, and concluding that the appellant, Mr. Yanofsky, had not been misled by the defect in the summons. However, there are compelling arguments that Justice Sully's decision failed to account for the Crown Court's acknowledgement that the original defect in the summons was fundamental. Furthermore, the judgment overlooked critical procedural obligations under the applicable 1991 provisions of Section 123(1) and 2, which substantially limited the ability to amend a summons on the day of a hearing. It also disregarded the possibility that the defendant could not have reasonably known whether another case might have been brought against him based on the original location and offence alleged, thus reinforcing the necessity of an adjournment. Key issues in the case. 0. Section 123(1) and 2 of the Magistrates' Court Act 1980, as amended by 1991 provisions. Section 123(1) states that no objection may be allowed for defects in substance or form in a summons. Section 123(2) specifies that if the variance misleads the defendant, the court shall adjourn the hearing upon the defendant's application. However, the 1991 amendments impose stricter limitations, substantially forbidding amendments to a summons outright on the day of a hearing unless the court determined that the defect was fundamental and that the defendant had already been misled by the variance. 0. Defects in the summons. The summons described the location as Margate instead of Westgate. The fixed penalty notice described the offence as no waiting, whereas the actual allegation involved waiting in a no-waiting zone. 0. Appellant's argument. Mr. Yanofsky argued that the defects misled him about the case he needed to defend, and that an adjournment was required under Section 123(2). He also argued that the original offence and location described in the fixed penalty notice could form the basis of a separate prosecution, creating uncertainty about the scope of the case. Additionally, under the stricter 1991 provisions, the appellant contended that the magistrates lacked the authority to amend the summons on the day of the hearing, unless the variance was determined to have already misled him. 0. Acknowledgement by the Crown Court. The Crown Court accepted the appellant's submission that the original defect in the summons was fundamental, creating a strong presumption that the amendment was both procedurally improper and prejudicial. How Justice Sully addressed Section 123(2). Justice Sully dismissed the appellant's arguments, concluding that the appellant was not misled by the variance in the summons, and that the magistrates acted properly in allowing the amendment. He emphasized 0. Awareness of the offence and location. Justice Sully noted that the appellant was aware of the location of the alleged offence, Ethelbert Terrace, Westgate, as it was outside his home. The defect describing the location as Margate was deemed immaterial because the appellant could not reasonably have been confused about where the offence occurred. 0. Amendment of the summons. Justice Sully held that the magistrates were correct in amending the summons at the outset of the hearing, as there was no evidence of prejudice to the appellant. 0. Nature of the variance. The shorthand description of the offence as no waiting was considered sufficient to inform the appellant of the nature of the charge. Counter-arguments, procedural violations and risks of prejudice. 1. Acknowledgement of a fundamental defect. The Crown Court's acknowledgement that the original defect in the summons was fundamental is highly significant. This acknowledgement implies that the defect was not a mere technicality, but went to the core of the charge. Under the 1991 provisions of Section 123(2), an amendment to correct a fundamental defect could only be justified if the court had already determined that the defendant had been misled. However, Justice Sully ruled that the appellant was not misled, creating a procedural contradiction. If the defect was fundamental, then by default, the defendant must have been misled, as no amendment would otherwise have been necessary. If the defendant was not misled, then the defect could not have been fundamental, and the amendment was procedurally unnecessary and impermissible under the 1991 provisions. 2. 1991 restrictions on amendments on the day of hearing. The stricter rules in force under the 1991 amendments substantially forbade amendments to a summons on the day of a hearing, unless the court found that the variance was fundamental and had already misled the defendant. By permitting the amendment without making these determinations, the magistrates violated the statutory restrictions. The mere presence of a variance in the summons suggests that the defect was significant enough to warrant a procedural safeguard, namely an adjournment. 3. Potential for multiple proceedings. The fixed penalty notice described the offence as no waiting, and identified the location as Margate. By contrast, the amended summons alleged waiting in a no-waiting zone at Westgate. The appellant could not have reasonably known whether another case might have been brought against him based on the original details in the fixed penalty notice, creating uncertainty about the scope of the proceedings. This uncertainty compounded the prejudice caused by the magistrate's failure to adjourn the hearing under Section 123(2). 4. Mandatory nature of Section 123(2). Section 123(2) is explicit that if a variance misleads the defendant, the magistrates must adjourn the hearing upon the defendant's application. The appellant's identification of the defect, coupled with the Crown Court's acknowledgement that the defect was fundamental, triggered this mandatory obligation. The failure to adjourn deprived the appellant of an opportunity to prepare a defense against the amended charge, in direct violation of the procedural safeguards intended by Section 123(2). 5. Procedural inconsistencies in Justice Sully's judgment. Justice Sully emphasized that the appellant was aware of the facts of the case, but this reasoning overlooks the procedural implications of the variance. The issue was not simply whether the appellant knew the factual basis of the charge, but whether the amendment to the summons prejudiced his ability to respond appropriately. The acknowledgement of a fundamental defect contradicts the finding that the appellant was not misled. If the defect was fundamental, as the Crown Court accepted, then necessarily had the potential to mislead the appellant. Conclusion. Justice Sully's judgment failed to account for the procedural safeguards under the 1991 provisions of Section 123(1) and 2. By allowing the amendment to the summons on the day of the hearing without determining that the defect was both fundamental and had misled the defendant, the magistrates violated statutory restrictions. Furthermore, the Crown Court's acknowledgement of a fundamental defect strongly suggests that the appellant was misled, triggering a mandatory obligation to adjourn the hearing. The judgment also overlooked the risk of prejudice caused by the potential for multiple proceedings based on the original offence and location described in the fixed penalty notice. Under Section 123(2), the magistrates were obligated to adjourn the hearing to ensure that the appellant could adequately prepare a defence against the amended charge. The failure to do so undermined the procedural fairness of the proceedings and rendered the judgment flawed. In a nutshell, the Magistrates Court Act 1981 prevents an amendment on the day of trial, unless the defendant is misled, and if so, S2 requires an adjournment. It seems that Anthony's status as a litigant in person with no legal training blinded the judiciary regarding the implicit principle that a summons cannot be changed on the day of the trial, without an adjournment that would allow the defendant to reconsider their position respecting the new summons. In Anthony's case, an amendment was erroneously deemed necessary, but it seemed that S2 of a 123 MCA had to be ignored and for the next few years. This bad case law in the associated High Court judgment forced a subsequent change in the wording of MCA S 123/1981, a clear indication that the judges do actually alter statutes in the UK and not Parliament. What is most telling about the above matter is that the intrinsic disdain for the child of a Ukrainian/Polish immigrant and a schizophrenic became so intolerable that creating an abhorrent precedent was preferable to acknowledging the simple error of errant magistrates. Respect to Chris Ateshi's a very good friend. Amongst the few people who treated Anthony with fairness. Can contact the author via info@greenday.co.uk. Published by Antbooks. Copyright Antbooks at greenday.co.uk. For orders of 100 or more at $3.80 each of this paperback publication for resale, contact the publisher directly.
Also available as an ebook on Amazon Kindle. You may also want to try out Anthony's music productions by searching Google for Block of Stone Go, or search for YouTube Block of Stone Music, or tinyl.com/goog56.